Good morning, everybody. Today is all about love. Welcome and thank you for being with us this morning. Please ignore the telephone. The local time. Good morning, everybody. Today is all about love. Well, is 11:46, maybe 11:47 a.m. on a Thursday. And today's date is February 8th, 2024. Here's a toast to you for joining us today. Thank you for remembering to be with us live. And thanks to those of you who are watching this after the fact in replay. Here's to you as well. If you've never been with us before with a live program, in live form, I say hi for more than 10 minutes to people. I thank people for a couple of gifts and do some programming notes. And so if that's you, if you're watching this in replay, you can skip ahead 15 minutes to the beginning of today's program. And our guest will be Jon Shellenberger, and I'm very excited about today's conversation. So where are you viewing from today? Can I say hi to a few of you? It looks like we're 5 by 5. Thank you for those reports, loud and clear. And then I want to make sure I have time to thank. I have a few things that have rolled in the last couple of days. Zazu says it's 5 by 5. Where are you viewing from today? Delay in the comments. Charlotte, that's Jack, in Tinley Park, Illinois. Gresham, Oregon. Tempe, Arizona. Red Deer, Alberta, Fairbanks, Alaska, it's -2 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, you want to shout out the window? It's not a competition, Don, but our snow is gone, and we are probably in the high 30s, maybe low 40s Fahrenheit. It's kind of a stiff breeze out there, but otherwise, it's very, very delicious to be out there in the sun. And here's the shelf cam giving you a look out the window as well. Back to where you are viewing from. Riverton, Illinois, and Bowling Springs, Pennsylvania. San Diego, California. Lodgepole, Alberta. London, UK. Swansea, Wales. McAllen, Texas. Hamlin, Germany. Phoenix, Arizona. Cloudy, Hansville, Washington. I don't know where Hansville is. Seattle, Washington. I know where that is. Webb Lake, Wisconsin. Hood River, Oregon. Hello, Gary. Dee Dee is in Ithaca, New York. Lane Photo is Mike. He's in Newland, North Carolina. I got to wake myself up. Let's go. I can read better than this. Come on, man. I'm going to be doing a bunch of reading today. Wake yourself up. Let's go. Glasgow, Scotland. That's Paul. Thorpe, Wisconsin. Victoria, BC. Pekka is in Finland. Tumwater, Washington. Burlington, Washington. Arnhem, the Netherlands. Columbia, Missouri. Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Tipton, Oklahoma. Petersburg, Alaska. This is always a shot of adrenaline. I don't care how many times we've done this. It's always a shot of adrenaline. I'm wandering around for the last half an hour just talking to myself. Everybody's like, what's with the guy in the red shirt? It's like, looks sad. I'm just concentrating. And there's always that feeling like, why do I even do this? I always get there's always such a mix of whatever. When I finally am with you, that apprehension goes away. It's like waiting to get on a plane. I just want to get on the plane. I don't have to want to stand around and wait. Can you relate? I don't know. James is in Polson, Montana. Jim is in West Fargo, North Dakota. Eugene, Oregon. Skokomish Reservation. Hello, Travis. Green Valley, Illinois. Ventura, California. North of Selah, Washington. Harlan, Iowa, exclamation point, says Patty. Running on empty. Nice shirt, Tiger Nick. Yeah, we're still talking about Marine Isotope Stage 2 today, so the red shirt is back one more time. Maybe for the last time this series. Media, Pennsylvania. Washougal. Okay, good. Well, thank you. I'm so glad that you're here. Let's show you let's go to document camera, make a couple quick announcements. Keep it fast-paced, boy. Some of you enjoy watching live. Fridays at noon, we have these departmental talks, and I will be live streaming tomorrow. Tomorrow is February 9th. That's a Friday at noon. Friday at noon, February 9th, 2024. That's tomorrow. And Marie Takach, who is the lab manager on the third floor of this building, is finishing up her PhD. So she'll be telling us about her dissertation topic, which is magmas related to the Misti volcano in Peru. And then it'll be a few weeks before we get our final talk of the winter quarter, Friday, March 1st at noon Pacific. Anthony Schoen from Spokane talking about geothermal. So we'll see some of you tomorrow live. If you want to put us into your schedule, if you haven't already, Friday at noon tomorrow with a whole different setup in the auditorium. Back to Docky. By now, we certainly know this routine. Today is Thursday at noon. I'll see you next Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Our most recent episodes had a red shirt. We were talking about the last glacial time, and Jon Shellenberger will be talking about the Missoula floods, which are also marine isotopes too. And Scott Burns will be with us on Sunday, and I will not be wearing a red shirt on Sunday. That's where Tiger Woods and I diverge. It'll be Sunday, no red shirt, because Scott Burns is going to be talking to us about very old Ice Age flood deposits in the Columbia River Gorge. So here's another way to look at it. Here's today, here's Sunday. Richard Waite is on tap for a week from today, and then a grand finale with 3 geologists on Sunday, February 18th. Okay. Can I ask one more time? Are we doing okay? If I see 5x5 one more time, I won't think twice about it. Let me do some very quick thank yous. Again, I'm not going to start the program until the top of the hour if you're waiting. And if you're watching this in replay, you can fast forward through this material. We have more than 500 live viewers at the moment, and people will continue to flow in. Document camera. A special thank you. A special thank you to Barbara. Barbara's in Corvallis, Oregon. Beautiful letter. Thank you, Barbara. And she said, I found this 1915 guidebook, USGS, Bulletin 611, the Northern Pacific with a side trip to Yellowstone Park. And that's the thing that we've been referring to. And I could not easily find a digital copy. And so Barbara has gifted this to me. This beautiful old document, more than 100 years old, 1915. And there are stunning pull-out maps from this Northern Pacific route through the Pacific Northwest. And some old photos as well. This is Campbell in 1915. And yes, he was talking about Glacial Lake Missoula back in 1915. Thank you, Barbara. I will add this to the collection, take good care of it, and make sure it gets some use here in the department. Some of us really love the old stuff. Thank you, Barbara. Keep it going, boy. Nice letter from John in Wisconsin, a failed geology major and turned accountant and CPA. And John says, enclosed are a mug for your better half and one for you too. The mug is a reproduction of the Century of Progress mugs and pitchers, which were sold by the Chicago office of the Red Wing Pottery Company at the 1933 Chicago World's Fair. The Century of Progress mugs originally came in an off-white or Albany, which is a dark brown glaze. So I'll do it this way. Here's to you, John, for these 2 mugs, one for me and one for Liz. And it's appropriate because we are talking about Brett's in the 1930s today. So here's to you, John. John also included a couple of vases, which to me are perfect for a mug. So I'm drinking out of a vase today in your honor, John. Thank you. There's also some beautiful little platters from Red Wing Pottery. Thank you. Well, so far things are working with the themes of our series, and so that's thoroughly appropriate. I got a couple more things. Michael from Janesville, Wisconsin. These shows are running so long, Michael said, I thought you should, I got some lunch sacks for you. You can pack a lunch for yourself since you're going 3.5 hours on some of these shows. And he took a beautiful old photo of Brett's in a field trip from a hot day in July of 1928. So thank you, Michael. And finally, our friend Sky Cooley from Montana, geologist, but also many other talents. I guess, Sky, you had these made? You must have had these made. Save the Tushy beds. These are the late Wisconsin deposits down by Walla Walla. A couple of these stickers. But then Sky also has this. Nick, this is the original Spokane flood. Played for the Spokane Indians in 1910. Just a single season. Here and gone in a flash. Just as Brett's said. Sky. So I don't totally understand the backstory. I guess this is a real baseball card, or I don't know. Did you have this made? Did you create this guy? I'm not quite sure, but if it's real, it couldn't be more perfect. The Spokane flood. Just a single season, here and gone in a flash. Just as J. Harlan Brett said back in the 1920s. Thank you, Sky. Okay. That's it for the thank yous. I need to get my head right. I'm about to take a little walk outside, and before I leave for my little walk, I'm going to send a Zoom invite to our guest, Jon Shellenberger, down in Toppenish, Washington. And by the time I get back to my office, Jon hopefully will be in the Zoom meeting waiting for me, and you will hear me talking to Jon in a few minutes, but you will not be able to hear him. We're just kind of testing things and getting him squared away. And then we'll be off and running at the top of the hour, probably like 12:05 by the time we really get going. So thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed. Wow, I'm so excited I rushed that. Thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Let's give you a shot out the window. Okay, Zoom. Start a new meeting. Swing this window over to the other monitor, boy. Make that window a little smaller. Invite your guest. SHELL. Gmail to Gmail. And away that goes. And away I go. Hot mic. Hot mic. Good afternoon, Mr. Shellenberger. How are you today? Oh, I'm doing wonderful. Oh, your voice, that audio is perfect. Holy cow. Did you do something different? Okay. Oh, there you go. Okay, so that's a delay from me. So can you mute your YouTube window? Okay, no problem. That's why we're kind of doing this first. Yep, that's fine. Yeah. No, that's right. Yeah, so that you're just kind of listening to me then, basically. So they cannot hear you right now, and I'm going to start in just a second. I'll go about 10 minutes. I'm going to show a couple of maps on my document camera, but I'll describe it well enough that you can get a sense of what I'm up to. I just want to lay out the geography just a little bit before we come to you. And do you have a hard out? Is there a meeting that you need to get to at the next hour or something like that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's good. Well, we'll just keep it nice and brisk, and we'll keep that in mind. But I don't want to double check. You're okay with a few live questions? Okay. Okay. Good. Well, thanks much. I think we're functional now. I'm going to slide you off to the side and get started. But thank you very much, John. Looking forward to this. Okay. A pleasant good afternoon to you all. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA, home of Central Washington University. I'm your host, Nick Zentner. I teach geology, but today we are going to discover geology in a new way. And I think you probably have a sense of that if you tuned into this episode entitled Living with the Missoula Floods. We have a very special guest, and we're going to learn all we can from him in the next hour or so. He does have a meeting at the top of the hour at 1 o'clock here Pacific time, so we'll push this right along. Before we go to John, let me say a couple of quick things. First of all, I have two acts today. Our first hour with Jon Shellenberger, going to learn as much as we can from him. Then I'm going to pause for a few minutes. I'll just put a beautiful illustration that you've already seen, done by John, by the way. I'll give you another chance to just kind of look at that illustration and just kind of meditate and just pause and reflect on what we learned from John. And then when I come back after about a 5-minute break, then we will continue with our studies of J. Harlan Bretz and Richard Foster Flint and so on, this time in the 1930s. So that's the plan. Yeah, so we'll be going along again today, but we really want to get to John as soon as possible. The other thing I want to do before we go to John is go to the document camera and just lay out some geography for almost everybody watching from around the world. These places, I want to make sure you know where we are. So, document camera. And by the way, special shout out to the Toppenish Middle School and Mr. Vargas's history class, 7th grade, I believe. And a special shout out to the daughter of our guest today, Zora. So, Mr. Vargas and you students, I hope you can type into the live chat once or twice. We'll make sure we get to your questions. If you can identify yourself somehow, we know that we're talking to your classroom live as well as everybody else. Where were we last time? Talking about the Bonneville flood, man. We were talking about the Pacific Northwest. We were talking about flood water in the last glacial, stage 2, marine isotope stage 2, red, spilling into southern Idaho, going through Hell's Canyon, much of that Bonneville water getting backed up at Wallula Gap and forming a temporary lake before that Bonneville water threaded through to the Pacific Ocean. So you might be able to see faintly, I have some sort of temporary Ice Age lake in south central Washington. Here's a better map and a more local map that I think will help us before we go to John. Wallula Gateway is a key part. Many people today call it Wallula Gap, but Brett's 100 years ago liked calling it Wallula Gateway, so we'll try that. Here I am in Ellensburg. John is down in Toppenish. It's about an hour drive south of Ellensburg. City of Yakima is here. Here's Vantage, Othello, Walla Walla, Pasco, Prosser. These are all south central Washington towns. And I just want to point out what I tried to do this morning with some Sharpie markers. Big floods of Ice Age water coming down from Vantage, coming down through the Othello channels, coming down the Cheney-Palouse track. And I've colored them red, meaning that we're stage 2. We're in the neighborhood of 20,000 years ago, or less, maybe as young as 13,000 years ago. But we don't care that much about that. What we do care about is this lake. And this is flood water that suddenly came to a screeching halt because there was too much water to fit through Wallula Gateway and then go down the Columbia River Gorge to Portland. It's this lake that is backing up the lower Yakima Valley that we're thinking about today. And it's also the Columbia Hills and Toppenish Ridge and Ottanum Ridge, all these ridges that were definitely present during the Ice Age. I think John is going to be helping us get a better appreciation for the Ice Age drama that was happening at some time in the past from a completely different point of view. Our guest is incredibly talented and incredibly versatile. He's an archaeologist. He's a cultural historian. He's a sociologist. He's a public school educator. He taught geology. He taught Native American studies up here at Central last year. And he's an illustrator. So who knows where we are going to go in our conversation with Jon Shellenberger, but I think we need to bring him in and see where he wants to go. So excited for this. So I'm putting my headphones on. I'm getting to the right button. And here he is, Jon Shellenberger. How are you today?
Doing well. How are you doing, Nick?
I'm doing fine, John. Thanks so much. I always enjoy chatting with you, and this is a special treat. Can you give us a sense of Toppenish, Washington, and your history in Toppenish? Did you grow up there, or is this just a recent thing where you've been raising your kids?
My family all comes from the Yakima Valley on both sides. My dad was in the Air Force, and as a result of that, I grew up all over the United States, following him in all of his various jobs. So it's allowed me to see a lot of the country, but also, you know, being rooted in, the Yakima Nation and the lands here, we always knew this was home. So returning here was pretty frequent, and I've always considered it my home, even though I've lived in New Jersey, Tennessee, all over. So yeah.
And your wife is Emily Washeen, so you guys are kind of a power couple. You are known throughout Washington for many reasons. Do both of you come from Yakima Nation, or is it
Yeah.
Colville, or how does that work? What are the specific family lines going back to the Yakima
Yeah.
Nation?
Emily's a Toppenish girl, for sure. Like,
Okay.
she lived in the same house all her life. She went to Toppenish. She's a Wildcat.
Okay.
She went to Central. She was a Wildcat there too. She did go to Evergreen for her master's, and so she was a Gooey Duck for a very short time.
Hmm.
But yeah, Toppenish has always been her home. She's Yakima. I'm enrolled Yakima, but I'm also a descendant of Cowlitz and Wintu.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's. Where are you working these days? Can you describe your job, and will that help us with our discussion today, what you're doing on your job these days?
Sure, I'm an archaeologist for Department of Fish and Wildlife, Washington State.
Hmm.
I'm mainly in charge of overseeing cultural resource protection for restoration occurring on the shrub steppe. So the areas that you've talked about in this program
Yeah.
are is pretty much my project area. So we're working to restore the diminishing shrub steppe, the sagebrush land, in the field of the Missoula floods, right? So
Right.
everywhere the Missoula floods touched is kind of where I work. But we have a problem in that, at contact with Lewis and Clark, there was 10 million acres of sagebrush steppe in the state of Washington. We now have 2 million acres. So we're down 80% within about 200 years. So the scientists I work with are trying to resolve these issues, especially as it pertains to fires. Many of you are
Mm-hmm.
aware of the rampant fires that are tearing through this neck of the woods, and trying to bring back sagebrush, because sagebrush grows really slowly, and a lot of animals, a lot of our sacred foods exist in this area, so they need our help. They're not able to survive in these hot of fires.
You're doing a great job. It's always so smooth, and I learn so much each time I visit with you. I think this is the moment. We're settled in now. We can go where you want to go, Jon. I can ask you a bunch of questions, or you can just view this as like a
No,
school visit, like you make school visits and talk about certain things locally. How do you want to proceed here?
well, I think I'd like to start by um, just expressing my interest in Missoula floods and why I'm here today and why I call it surviving the Missoula floods. So,
Good.
for a long time in archaeology, it's been misunderstood or understood. Native Americans weren't here. They were came over here on the Clan Bridge 3,000 years ago. That was the original theory by Herjelichka. I don't know how to pronounce his name correctly, but
Could have fooled me. Yeah.
so
Okay.
an archaeologist said Indians were here 3,000 years ago. That's it.
Three.
And that
Okay.
date keeps getting pushed back further and further. Um, and my concern was with that, as an archaeologist and as a native, is that doesn't match up with our oral histories. And what really moved me with the Missoula floods, and actually Harlan Brett's, it's not even a real name, right?
Yeah, he
With
was Harley.
Brett's
Yeah.
floods, yeah.
Yeah. Harley Brents.
Um, what amazed me about him was that he came up against something similar to what a lot of our elders are coming up against, and that he wasn't believed right away. They thought he was crazy. They actually had an intervention that he didn't wasn't aware of, present, and he it was disguised as a way for him to present his concepts, right,
You
and
got
his
it.
ideas amongst his peers. This was
Right.
like a big meeting amongst his peers, and they basically shot him. It was a firing squad, and he didn't know what he was walking into.
Right.
And I found that so ironic, in that this discussion of Missoula floods and the fact that a lot of our elders talk about our oral history as being a fact, as the oldest data set in the Western Hemisphere. They're shot the same way by Western scientists, like, oh, those dumb Indians, they don't know anything. This is all made up. Um, and so I see a parallel there,
Yeah.
and it really, that's what kind of like gripped me. It was like, oh wow, he wasn't even, here's a non-native guy, and he wasn't even accepted by his peers. I was like, that's just like what we face.
Huh.
um, and now that you have older sites in North America, and the date's kind of getting pushed back, and we're starting to take a look back at these much older dates that archaeologists have found,
Mm-hmm.
and giving them more thought. And also, we have new technologies that allow us to look at things in a very different way that we didn't 20, 30 years ago. So,
Right.
and all of those archaeologists that came up with these dates predating Missoula floods, predating the Ice Age, predating the Bering Strait, their careers were tarnished forever. Some of them were, you know, subjected to obscurity for the rest of their lives, and
Mm-hmm.
now they're gone. And now we're actually considering their work as being significant work, and I think that's going to continue as well. So there seems to be this wave of even within academia where ideas are just shot down. And what I want to share with the young people here is that there's going to be moments in your career where you will be thought to be crazy, but if you continue to work on these things and they feel like they're right, keep doing that work. Do
Mm-hmm.
not give up, because I think we would all be hurting if Brett's didn't continue his work 20 years after that intervention. We would be in a different place. And I'm glad he did pick that work back up. because we're still learning. You're still shedding light and telling
Yeah.
the story. And that leads me into my other point that
Good.
this landscape is a living thing, and it's a living thing to Native Americans. And when we think about land, we don't think of it as being alive. We don't think of rocks as having a life. We don't think as of dirt as having a life. But I think geologists would say it something differently about that. It does have a story. It
Hmm.
does speak to them, and you have to really be able to understand that language and how to read those things. You're trained to do that. Other geologists that study the Missoula floods are trained to do that as well. Well, Native Americans have a very different way of understanding that life of the land. And the more and more that times comes on, that scientific way of understanding and that cultural understanding is really starting to match up. And that's when the magic happens, because when you apply those two things together, you really start to get a framework of how things need to be managed, how things need to be protected. And the Native American way of understanding is no longer just an alternative. It is the
Hmm.
plan. It is the
Hmm.
rule.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's what I appreciate about this program and the other work that's going on is like you see it as a living thing. It does have a life. Um, and we can get into some of the specifics about the Native understanding of that a little bit, about those lives and how they've grown and how they've changed and what we've witnessed through time.
Well, God, you speak so beautifully. I'm just curious, as an outsider to your world, how prevalent the Missoula flood narratives are, whether it's the Yakama Nation or Cowlitz or something else. Are these water stories just everywhere? And even as a young person, it's just the most obvious thing when you hear some of these stories?
Yeah, I mean, the way that you think about tribes now isn't how tribes were before. What we have are a bunch of descendant communities. That's communities that descend from Aboriginal peoples, indigenous peoples that lived a very different way. We didn't live on reservations. So
Yeah.
we lived on the land and we lived on the Columbia Basin. And all of those tribes, those hundreds of tribes and villages, they all had an interaction and experiences with that. And so when tribes were split up, they weren't split up according to their culture or their traditions necessarily. They were split up forcibly,
Mm-hmm.
but they still maintain an oral tradition. And that's really important here, to get across that we survived on this land for thousands of years without written documentation, without the written word. And the oral tradition is a matter of life and death. To forget or not pay attention was not an option. You had to listen. You had to listen to your elders, to the people that are guiding you, how to hunt, to gather, to fish, to carry out different ceremonies, where to hunt, gather, and fish, because it was a matter of life and death. There are things out on this landscape that can kill you. There are plants that can kill you. And that is the result of, I guess, the application of a scientific method. If natives didn't have a scientific method, how would we survive for thousands of years? We
Right.
were the original engineers. We were the original botanists. We were the original scientists of this landscape. Because if we didn't have that, we'd keep eating the death camas and, kill ourselves into extinction.
Right.
You have to have that. Test a theory. If it
Yeah.
doesn't work,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Totally.
Um, and so it is all according to oral tradition. So that's why it's persisted for these for these thousands of years, right? Since the Missoula floods, that we had places on the landscape where we sought refuge. Because if you didn't, you were hitting 60-mile-an-hour waters that were going to kill you. And we had ways of preserving our foods. We had ways of understanding how nature worked. And, it helped explain how things came together. So, Linnaeus has Carolus Linnaeus, or AKA Carl. He
Yeah.
called himself Carolus Linnaeus.
Uh-huh.
Um, but anyway, he had his classification of natural organisms. Well, we have the same thing, and that classification is understood in the oral tradition in our language, and it's not directly translatable. You can't directly translate all things from our traditional language over into English. So that's another point I wanted to make here, that we have our own understanding. We're not dumb. We're very well educated as to the way this world works, and we have pretty good knowledge of what happened during the Missoula floods. So
Do you have, you probably have many goals in your professional life. Is one of them maintaining certain stories within your community versus educating people outside of your community? Which is
I
more important, or are both?
I, th I think both, because you know we're all now citizens of the United States, and as a citizen, you have to recognize the United States Constitution, and under that Constitution, there's a specific article and clause. It's called the Supremacy Clause, that all treaties are to be considered the supreme law of the land. You can't ignore one part of the Constitution for another. So the treaties that the tribes have signed, um, those are the supreme law of the land. So that's our government that signed those treaties with the tribes. They recognize the rights to gather, hunt, fish, practice our religious ceremonies in all of our usual and accustomed places. So that has deep legal meaning, but it has also deep cultural meaning. But it is the supreme law of the land. It's the law. So it's not just the tribe's law, it's all of our law. So as citizens, many of you are not aware of these laws. You think that it's just an Indian treaty. No, no, no. It's under the Constitution. It applies to everybody.
Let's think of the seventh graders sitting in that classroom right now, Zora and her classmates, and Mr. Vargas. If you were physically in their classroom right now in the lower Yakima Valley, would you be doing anything with the local landmarks that they might know? Or how have you been? What are your tricks when you visit a school classroom? Does it depend on any local landmarks? Is that a key to get you into some of the things that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, you want to start talking about Toppenish Creek? We can
Sure.
talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Toppenish Creek, as Nick had mentioned, and I can bring up and share my screen.
Sure.
So Nick mentioned there was a dam, an ice dam at Wallula Gap near Tri-Cities. And as a result of that, the water backed up into the Yakima Valley. It went through like Prosser. You see a lot of rock formations that along the Yakima River that were partially created or carved by the Missoula floods. But that water continued up into the Yakima Valley and flooded Toppenish all the way to White Swan, up to, what did you say the current elevation understanding is
Yeah,
roughly?
from our world, 1250 feet elevation.
1250.
Yeah.
Okay, so the information that I share right now, I think the understanding when this work was done was about 1100. So it's only a difference of about 100 feet.
Yeah.
This work was done by Don Reichmuth, the late Don Reichmuth, Dr. Don Reichmuth, and the late Al Potter, who worked for Geomax. But they did a geomorphological assessment. That's just a fancy way of kind of like geology
Yeah.
of Toppenish Creek. Not to get too fancy with my seventh graders here, but to look at what happened during the Missoula floods. So let me share that screen with you.
That'd be great. That'd be great. And while you're doing that, viewers, we're going to come to you. I'll keep my eye on the clock. We'll make sure there's at least 15 minutes of question and answer with Jon. And again, seventh graders, I don't know how seventh graders, how can you identify yourself in the live chat? Maybe you could type Vargas in uppercase as the first word, and I'll look for that. And if I see the word Vargas and then a question, I know it's coming from you guys, and you guys get precedent over anybody else. Okay, Jon, if you can hit the full screen, I can see your kind of.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Can I do a slideshow? Is that what I would do?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
You can.
Thank you.
A couple ways to do it. There's a.
Oh, from current slide. There we
Okay.
go. It's going to take a second, I think.
Okay. That home
Come
computer's
on.
churning away. Come on, baby.
It is. It's thinking.
Okay, I hope it don't crash the whole thing.
Oh no. Okay. All right. Cool.
There
All
we go.
right.
Good. Yep.
Here is the Missoula floods.
Thank you.
Nick had already
Perfect.
gone over that. Right here. Can you see my cursor,
Yes, we
Nick?
can. Yep, we can.
So here's the Columbia Hills right here,
Thank you.
right? And
Yep.
then and here it comes through Prosser and then into the lower Yakima Valley. Now, when this was created in '07, '08, I'm not sure that the upper Yakima Valley it was kind of I don't think it was widely known that it was going up into the Yakima Valley. It was hypothesized, but now I think we're more firm on it entering into the upper Yakima Valley and almost to the into the canyon.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the lower Yakima Valley. So it went up basically the path of the Yakima River. And here is the max flood elevation. This is the outline here. This was the edge of the pool. If you think about this as a really big swimming pool, this is the edge. This is the shallow part, and here's
Beautiful.
the deep part. So
Excellent.
White Swan is 970 feet in elevation. So it was buried under what 200 feet
Yeah.
roughly of
Mm-hmm.
water, and Wapato is 850, so it's even more. So this is the deep end of the pool. Um, and so keeping in mind that this is the pathway of the Yakima River, this is water going 60 miles an hour, maybe slower. I'm not sure about in this portion how fast it filled up, but
Mm-hmm.
in the other part of the Missoula floods, I think the estimate was what 60 miles an hour, right, Nick?
I don't know about the lower Yakima, but further east, when that water was really free flowing and heading from Spokane down to Wallula Gap, yeah. But I think those velocities maybe are quite a bit lower as this water's creeping up into the lower Yakima.
Still a lot of water moving
Yes, totally. Yes.
quicker than is comfortable to deal with.
Yes. Yes.
So when it did that, it deposited a lot of sediment. It just deposited a lot of boulders that we call erratic boulders. Um, and here's kind of what it would have looked like looking from White Swan over to Mount Adams. This is all of the ice in the water. This was what it would look like. So you'd have been under a lot of water. And here's some of the erratic boulders that exist. You see these when you drive out to White Swan and you drive across our valley. You see these big, huge boulders that don't even look like they belong here.
Mm-hmm.
That's because they were deposited by this massive pool of water. And here is all the silt. When I was talking about silt, is basically just a fancy geologist word for dirt.
You got it, man. You got it. You're speaking our language now.
Don't ever call it dirt in front of a geologist or a soil scientist. But these are all these layers. This is over in Zilla. A lot of you have seen this when you're going to Zilla, when you're going to games to Prosser. You see these when you look over from the freeway. You see these beds, and each one of these represent a different flood event. And here there's about 20 that are exposed. That you can see. So there was at least over 20 flood events that existed within the valley here. So that's what those are.
John, I'm going to jump in every once in a while because I see questions from Vargas. So Mr. Vargas's class said, would the fact that the area was underwater create the fertile farmland that we have today?
I mean, it definitely could. It would contribute to that. I think the yes. I mean, I guess so. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Nick? Because
Totally,
yeah,
yes, absolutely. That silt is perfect for storage of water and everything else. And many of those vineyards and everything else are all tied to those silts. So great. Keep the questions coming, Mr. Vargas, and please continue, John.
Sorry, I can't grow a weed. So I'm the first in 500 years on my father's side not to be able to grow a crop. I was actually the first non-farmer in 500 years on my father's side. So
it had to happen sometime, John.
I know. Such a disappointment. Okay. So when you're actually looking at the the lower valley, this is
Hmm.
kind of what it looks like. You have Yakima River deposits, you have these silt deposits on either side. This is like just past Zilla, Granger. You have alluvial fans. This is the Toppenish fan and Simcoe fan that enter in. These are huge alluvial fans in our valley. You have landslides, a landslide over here. The and I don't know if you've talked about those slides ever, Nick, but um,
Not
those both
much,
have
no.
yeah, those both have names that come from the word Toppenish comes from these landslides.
Hmm.
Tupnish or Hupnish, whatever the two different dialects, but the same word, but it refers to those slides. But this is kind of what the different features in the valley, how they looked to the geomorphologists. But it didn't really make sense. It didn't make sense to them why things are the way they are until
Hmm.
they started to take a closer look. But what they did find out when the Missoula floods did come in, it actually pushed the Yakima River way over here, almost to White Swan,
Hmm.
way past Hera, into a place called Mud Lake. You don't know Mud Lake anymore because Mud Lake was turned into a drain. It was a remnant lake um, that was carved by the floods and used to be in an old channel of the Yakima River. It is now a drain. They call it Mud Lake Drain.
Hmm.
Well, the Yakima River flowed from Union Gap, like where it enters the valley now, but then it shot east and south, like I said, almost to White Swan, way
Hmm.
past Hera, then down into the course where Toppenish Creek is. And so the scientists were already scratching their heads like before all of this work was done. Like Toppenish Creek has this huge floodplain.
Hmm.
That floodplain is a fancy word of just saying the course of the river. So you can have different channels in a river. So like Yakima River has multiple channels, you can drive and see those multiple channels. It had a lot more historically. Well, Toppenish Creek was the same way. In fact, according to our oral history, you could take a canoe all the way from White Swan to the mouth of Toppenish Creek, which empties out near Granger, without even floating in the main channel of Toppenish Creek. That's how wet this place was
Oh,
historically.
wow. That's cool. That is
Yeah.
really cool.
And it's not all just the Missoula floods, and it's not all just the water that created that. And I will get to that point.
Good.
But anyway, let's get back to the the Yakima River being knocked off its course.
Hmm.
So it transitioned from its most westerly um, channel, then started to shift going east.
Hmm.
And what it did was start to carve through all of that sediment that was laid down by the Missoula floods. And it basically just kind of swept things like a like a broom.
Hmm.
And it swept everything kind of clean. And everything that didn't get swept would just stayed there. So there's this place called the Island. Many of you know it if you go out to White Swan and you pass by Labby Mint. Labby Mint exists right on the slope of this thing called the Island. This is where it basically just jumped. It didn't jump. It doesn't have legs, but it skipped over the island and it left this tushy bed, this really large tushy bed that's still visible.
Hmm.
It's humongous
Hmm.
today. It's like 10, 15, 20 feet higher than the rest of the valley. Um, so it swept this silt and it kept doing this every time a Missoula flood event occurred in this valley. So it always was cleaned out. And then that was what was left. You see these eroding tushy beds, the layers that I showed you earlier that are visible. It it basically shows you exactly how many events occurred here. So this happened at least 20 times in the valley.
Hmm.
So it made a huge impact on the landscape. And here's a picture of Toppenish Creek. There's a main channel, another channel, so it's a collector channel. There's actually three channels historically on Toppenish Creek, this huge floodplain with this tiny little creek on it. And you had all these other feeder creeks and springs. So, what were the other mechanisms working here? What might you guess would also be a factor in the way the hydrology worked in this valley? Nick,
Boy. Well, are we in the Ice Age now, or are we much younger?
we could be in the Ice Age.
Okay.
Let's say the Missoula floods are over.
Yeah.
What might also alter this creek?
Possibly some tectonic lifting, or possibly some change in the water coming down the Yakima from the Cascades.
It could be tectonic lifting. Yeah, that's
Okay.
definitely a factor here.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a much simpler answer, one that you
Okay.
probably don't even think about.
I guess I didn't right there.
That's um these little guys.
Oh boy.
Beavers.
Oh boy.
People don't think of beavers as being a real factor in hydrology and
Mm-hmm.
the function of the rivers and creeks in our area. Why? Because they were wiped out from fur trade and then they were seen as a nuisance because beavers for some reason have an attraction to flowing water, and when they hear flowing water they have to stop it. And how do they stop it? They create these dams, like you see on the left here. This is a beaver dam. Now, according to our oral history, beavers ruled Toppenish Creek. These guys were the first hydrologic engineers,
Mm-hmm.
because they had beaver dams all over the place. And that's what created these really, really wet conditions all the way through much of the summer. So that is why the wetlands and everything associated with them are so important, because there were so many of them. But because the beavers have basically been wiped out, there were just oral history evidence of how important they were to this process.
Aha.
So, and now we're seeing in restoration where we're bringing beavers back, to try to make these systems more healthy and create a more connected river stream.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Doing great.
so yeah. So that, I was trying to think without getting into the weeds here,
Sure.
I don't want to get too deep into that, but
I think that's great. I think unless you had a couple other major things that you definitely wanted to cover,
yeah,
John, maybe we'll go to some live Q&A with the middle schoolers in mind, but also others who are watching. And then if there are a few major themes you want to introduce or revisit before we say goodbye, that would be wonderful. Would you mind telling me about, while we're waiting for some live questions, would you mind telling me about that beautiful illustration that you created?
sure.
What's the story
Yeah.
behind that?
So do you want to, I don't know if you want to bring it up or,
I'm gonna display it as soon as we're done, and they're gonna be
okay.
staring at it for about 5 minutes, I think.
Well, that illustration represents, I don't know if you can, anybody can guess what cartoon that is related to. Some of you are familiar with Disney cartoons, but it's actually a native Cinderella, that I created for my kids because kids are subject, they see so many things, they get so much information, but we really have to tap into that to try to share some of our cultural values. So, you have native Cinderella, and then you have, the blue jay and the magpie. And the blue jay and the magpie are, um, two specific characters, that are associated with our understanding of the Missoula floods. The spike on the back of the head of the blue jay, um, is a result of ice that fell onto the bird's head,
Mm-hmm.
like a what do you call it? Icicle.
Yep. Yep.
And then when you watch magpies when they land, they kind of dip, and that's when the water was melting, from the ice, and that magpie, that water dropped on its head, and it was on it, and it was trying to shake it off. So every time you see a magpie land, that characteristic is a result of our the Missoula floods, that ice age. So I wanted something to represent that. And then in back of, Cinderella in that image
We're
is
we're looking at it right now. I finally fumbled around. I've got it here, John.
okay.
So please continue. Yeah.
And then the image in back of, Cinderella, that mountain is Rattlesnake Mountain, which we call Lalique. which was high enough out of the Missoula floods, where is a place where we sought refuge, one of the places, as well as the Columbia Hills. And in doing that, we had our foods and medicines. That many of them are still there. They were witness points for us,
Hmm.
where we stood and watched those things happen. The Columbia Hills is another witness point for us, where you can see the five sacred mountains. Another geological, uh, what do you call it, event where you had Simcoe Mountain,
Yep.
Wachstum. We call it
Hmm.
Wachstum. That Matt Adams was this jealous, sister, and she was jealous of the Simcoe Mountain because the sun always greeted her in the morning first. And so, as a result of that jealousy, she chopped up her head and tore her apart and threw her all around on the earth. And that's why you have all of these different, mountains and hills and stuff around Simcoe Mountain that represent her body.
Hmm.
And as punishment, they creator put an eagle on Mount Adams to keep her at bay, to keep a watch on her so she doesn't act up. And then the creator gifted Simcoe Mountain with these beautiful necklaces, which are represented by the really clear, really, pristine creeks and water that flow off of it.
Hmm.
And then as punishment to Mount Adams, he gave her these real ugly streams. They're all muddy and murky. So these are the oral histories that we're talking about important places. So that Columbia Hills is a witness point for that. So it's very important. It's a place we return to remember these stories and these events that where we teach our kids, and pass on that oral tradition that we've been passing on for thousands of years. So,
And so, Emily, your wife probably heard that story as a very young girl growing up in Toppenish. Did you catch wind of the story a little bit later
as a professional, I kind of had to make my life in it because, as an archaeologist for the tribe, and still today, we're trying to protect these sacred sites, and in doing so, we really have to dive in. My former colleagues have to dive in to the oral history and try to connect all of these things with the archaeology to get a real line of historical events going back thousands and thousands of years. So
Hmm.
it all contributes to the significances of these places. And a lot of times, archaeologists aren't trained in these oral traditions, so they don't even consider them. And as a result of that, it's um, it it results in a negative impact to those resources because they don't know how to manage them because they didn't consider those cultural values.
Hmm.
And that's another point I want to get across to the young people is that you need to consider, people and, those who speak a different language other than your own and have different perspectives that are different than your own, in order to, I guess, be successful, in managing the resources and making decisions because you're not just making decisions for yourself, you're making them for everybody, forever. And that was the truth that we have always walked in, that we are preserving and protecting these resources forever. That's the scale we work on, not just for our lives today, for our own careers, but for everybody forever, for our grandchildren, great grandchildren, people we will never meet. That's the love that we have for this land and for these resources.
Beautiful, powerful. Wow. Thank you, John. We're going to go to the live viewers and we'll just continue where we go with the time we have left with our guest. Karen wonders, do you have a website with the oral histories? And maybe tied to that, like, I'm just curious about, is there a major difference of opinion within your community about how
Oh,
much you want to share with
yeah,
everybody?
no, and what I share, about the five different mountains, that varies depending on who you talk to. It's like one band will consider Mount Rainier, Mount Adams, uh, Simcoe Mountain, Mount St. Helens, Mount Hood as a sacred mountains. But if you go to the Cowlitz, they may be a different set of mountains. But that oral history still persists. That that tradition or that trend persists throughout. But there is a website, Wisdom of the Elders. They did a series of oral history interviews with folks from around the Pacific Northwest that share those. You have the Plateau People's Portal through WSU that shares a lot of written documentation. And I think there's also some videos as well. Um, and then, yeah, those are the two offhand. And then my work is at nativeanthro.com. My illustrations. So that's nativeanthro.com.
Wonderful. Let's keep
Yeah.
it going here. Mr. Vargas had a couple of questions earlier. I'll find those, but in the meantime, Jon, does your oral history specifically reference the Missoula floods?
Yes. Yes. It does specifically. Yes.
That's
Yeah.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Pat Miller is in Yakima. Are there oral history references as to how quickly the floodwater filled the Yakima Valley?
Um, I don't know that,
You can pass.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
hard to come up with details there. I'm still looking for Mr. Vargas as I scroll back. Let's grab whatever I can. Sharon is in Malaga, up in the Wenatchee area. Rock Island Overlook site was recently redated to 13,000 to 16,000 before present. Are you aware of any other Columbia Plateau sites being redated?
I don't know about, well, I know there's being work being done on Paisley Caves. I was never one of those that wanted to get in that battle of pushing that date back. There's kind of like different enclaves within archaeology where people focus on the old ancient stuff. But I am moderately aware of work being done in Idaho, and I can't remember the name of the cave, but that doesn't surprise me. I mean, you know, yeah. So
Well, I guess the way I say it, without knowing much of your world, is that our dates we have now for the youngest floods and the dates that we have now in the scientific community for the oldest archaeological sites are clearly overlapping. So this question about did we have
yeah,
any eyewitness accounts, that's not a question anymore.
I think it's just a matter of how we measure things or how we interpret things compared to a Western paradigm and Western thought. We don't think of things in miles per hour 300 years ago because,
Right.
that's just, there's fast and there's really fast.
Okay. Very good. Mr. Vargas, I found one of your questions here, and maybe the bell's about to ring in that seventh grade class. I'm not sure. Mr. Vargas, or maybe one of his students, wonders would the Wapato be growing during that time period? So this is back a ways. I guess maybe during
Well,
the wet time.
I've heard theories that Wapato, some people have said that Wapato came as a result of the Missoula floods. It's really difficult to prove or disprove that because that's a catastrophic event that forever changed the valley. So it might not be, but there's definitely a trend where you see Wapato in the wasteland or whatever you want to call it, the wake of the Missoula floods, the field of Missoula floods, Suvi Island, our valley, it's everywhere. Um, Missoula, Wapato is really a tough route. It can survive in the ground without water for at least 80 years.
Okay,
So,
thank you. Rachel wonders after the floods, was recovery from the devastation a part of the oral history?
well, I think they definitely knew that things needed to be protected because there was purposeful protection of certain plants and foods as a result of the Missoula floods. So they knew its destruction. So if they knew of its destruction, then they knew that there was a potential for loss.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess you could interpret that as some understanding that, yeah, they're going to have to recover from this because it is devastating, right? They were bringing stuff up there on purpose so it would not be lost forever. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Well, I've got a question for you. You got a couple more minutes, Jon? Are you looking
I
at the
do.
clock?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
So Brett's was out here every summer in the 1920s, and his last summer was 1929, and really his last few weeks out here, he found himself in the lower Yakima between Benton City and Prosser in the Chandler Narrows area, and
Hmm.
he was really surprised and thought it was a very important place that you've got these multiple silt beds that you were talking about, both up the valley and down the valley, but in that stretch he couldn't believe there was scabland and that there must have been some high velocity squeezing through that Chandler Narrows area. Is that
Oh yeah.
can you comment at all about that stretch? Is that an important area in the
It
valley?
it definitely is those rock features that you see, the kind of standing figures. Those are beings for us, and so we work to protect those. It's an incredibly important area,
Hmm.
all the way back to Missoula floods, because yeah, it's unique portion of the river because you have that, the basalt pushed right up into the river, and it creates
Right.
kind of a chute,
Yes.
uh, where it does not do that in other portions of the river. So that it's the least complex portion of the Yakima River because it didn't have a lot of room to move.
Hmm.
But it also was incredibly important to fishery because you had Prosser fishery, and so the river didn't have room to move. That means the fish didn't have room to move. So settlement became very important. But yes, there are very significant oral history um, events that occurred in that stretch and those formations. Yeah, for sure. I'm glad they
Roy,
brought that up because it's a
yes.
cool place.
It is a cool. You can just tell it's a cool place just by it's so
Yeah.
different than everything else along that stretch. Um, Roy wonders, is there an overlap between archaeology and anthropology in your work?
Oh, wait, before let's go back. Let's go
Yeah,
back. There's the
yeah.
word because you'll see on the sign Yakutat Road. When you go through that stretch, it says Yakutat Road. There's an exit, but that's our word for that is Yakutat, which is basically means the river flowing through that that narrow channel. So it's not Yakutat like Alaska. It's Yakutat. So they didn't know how to say that. So that's where that word comes from,
That's
uh,
cool.
about
Well,
movement. So
well, I don't want to move on from that either because it's still. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but it's still confusing to me that if the water is getting backed up at Wallula Gap, I don't understand why it's just not creeping towards the city of Yakima. Why is it actually picking up speed as it's backing up through that little stretch? I mean, he saw some deposits, even some gravels, so he knew that there was some faster water through there, but it doesn't make
it's like
sense to me.
I think of it as like a finger on a hose. It just because you had such a narrow channel,
Yeah,
and it was probably moving faster there than it would have been in the like our valley
yeah.
where it opens up, so it loses that velocity, and then you had all of that the silt dumping into the valley. You probably had a lot faster moving water, and it probably picked up a little bit of speed in
Hmm.
that stretch. But then it just opens up, right? The valley just opens right up from Prosser going up north, and you'd lose all of that.
Okay, how about two or three more? I think I know your answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. Bruce wonders, so I'm not sure I heard any oral stories about the floods. Did I miss them? So
Is
are
that Bruce?
you? No, it's just Bruce, viewer Bruce Gravens. So I think he's wondering if there's specific Missoula flood stories you want to tell us from an oral point of view, but I don't think you're interested in doing that.
Well, I think I thought I already covered that, like
Yeah.
going up to the Columbia Hills, going to Lalik, going up to the
Yes.
mountain.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So that
And
that's what we had to do,
from our point of view, the lake wasn't there for more than a couple of weeks at a time.
right?
Now, is there evidence of settlement on a former lake shore, like a bathtub ring around the valley, or not
Well,
necessarily?
there's definitely oral history about there being wood deposited on along the high water mark. Elders have talked about that. That was brought in by the floods. Then we also have some pretty old sites
Hmm.
up in, above the Missoula flood marks,
Mm-hmm.
that are thousands and thousands of years. Some of the oldest archaeology actually is above the Missoula floods, down on along the river, because you wouldn't see that because it was all post Missoula floods.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely the oral tradition as it connects with the birds, as it connects to with the different plants. I mean, without, revealing all of this proprietary knowledge,
Right.
there's definitely oral history tied to us bringing those plants and those medicines up to those high points during the floods and seeking refuge so they were not destroyed.
Last one.
Yeah.
So your day job, your day-to-day job is Washington Department of Fish and Game. Is that what you said? Or
Fish and Wildlife, yeah.
Yeah. So do you have field work in your job? And is it assessing cultural significance of places, or can you give us a feeling for what kind of field work you are called to do on a weekly or daily basis?
Well, there's not just looking at the archaeology, the stones and bones, as you might understand it. It's actually trying to consider all impacts, not, to include the plants and what types of plants need to be brought back. It's not just about bringing back a sagebrush. It's what type of sagebrush,
Uh
because
huh.
now, according to our oral history, um, you know, there were various resources that were brought to these high points that are much more diverse than the Western understanding. They go beyond the Linnaean classification, um, the different lomatiums, the different sagebrush. Um, we understand, like the different routes in like Ellensburg versus Wenatchee versus the Columbia River. Those all have different properties to them. Our people have understood that. But Western scientists, 20 years ago may say, well, those are all just bitterroot. Those are all just, lomatium. But now, through the advent of evolutionary ecology, um, they're looking at those plants and finding genetically that they're much more diverse than they understood.
Hmm.
And that ties into that oral tradition, our understanding of the different properties that separate um, them from, like bitterroot in Wenatchee versus bitterroot in Ellensburg. Some had more medicinal properties, some have more food properties. And so it, it just so happens, I think, probably the most diverse are probably these Missoula flood areas, the places up above, like um, Rattlesnake Mountain,
Right.
Columbia Hill,
Yes.
because they would have that biodiversity genetically because they've existed longer. Um,
Fascinating, fascinating. Well,
yeah,
you're doing such meaningful work. I hope you keep at it for a long time. I mean, there's no shortage of work. I'm sure of that.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time and the questions and consideration. It's always a pleasure to be able to speak on this um, and continue these conversations and have them more often. Because like I said, like Brett's, our oral tradition, our history has not been considered,
Hmm.
and it's just only beginning, unfortunately. But let's keep the ball rolling.
Let's keep the ball rolling. And we were thinking about maybe doing some field videos, you and I, and maybe we should just kind of take this momentum and keep rolling here, John, and
I'm
do a little
I'm
bit more
down
of
with it.
this.
I'm
Okay.
I'm good with it, man.
Very
Let's do
good.
it.
Okay.
So, all
Thank you for
right.
your time
Thank you.
today, John.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye bye.
All right. Bye.
Jon Shellenberger, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. What a resource. Amazing stuff. Hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. I'm going to give you a full screenshot of John's Native Cinderella piece, and we'll just take a few minutes to reflect on what we learned from Jon, and I'll be back in just a few minutes to continue this episode. Thank you so much. Once again, here's to Jon Shellenberger for his time today. Really enjoyed that visit. Hope that you did too. Here's to John. And here's to Mr. Vargas's history class. I think the bell has rung and they're on to the next class, but it was fun to have them with us as well. Okay, it's a couple minutes after 1 o'clock local time, and I am not wrapping this episode up. As I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, I have plans to continue right now for the second half of this program because I'm running out of letters, and I've got all sorts of good stuff from Sharon and Malaga, from many other community members here, basically, the viewers. And so we are focusing primarily on Bretts and Large and Flint and Hodge and Bowman, all these characters that we've established to this point in the series. We're going to propel forward since we just have a few letters left in the alphabet. You can think of these long shows as like 2 letters crammed into one, if you want. So I'm excited to get to some of this. And a few of the slides and documents I got an hour ago from Vic Baker, and I just slapped them into the presentation. So we'll be reading it for the first time together. So some of this is as fresh as can be. Can I double check that we're 5 by 5 as I fumble to get ourselves ready to go? I need to kind of try to remember what we're actually doing here. 5 by 5, are we okay? Okay, thank you, Sven. Thank you. All right, let's go ahead then and proceed. We'll mostly just follow the slides, I do believe. But let me get that ready by escaping out of that. Maybe we will start with the website. So here we are, back to in the groove here after our guest today. Only one guest today. This 2 guests per show thing isn't going to happen again for a while, I don't think. So it's been a while since we've done this. This is one way to click and keep track of the episodes. I guess no, it's not. If we click on floods in the upper right, I assume you're doing this for each episode. Maybe you're not. I don't know. This is optional, I guess. But if you're really into this, you're going and checking out each of these papers as we go. So today, a repost of a paper in 1920 by William Morris Davis. We're going to really get into the details of at least the backstory on why this amazing Grand Coulee publication by Bretts in 1932 came to be. Aaron Waters is a minor character. We're not going to have time to make a major character out of him. But he has an interesting paper for you in 1933 in Lake Chelan area. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Boom, 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 boom. Richard Foster Flint, former student of J. Harlan Bretts at the University of Chicago. Dick Flint is a young geology professor at Yale. And much like Bretts in the 20s, Flint is coming out to the Scablands pretty much every summer in the 1930s. So we could have a whole alphabet, I suppose, on Flint and his students and where he went and get Google Earth by Glenn going on Flint. But we're almost done with the series. But I'm giving you all those papers not to read necessarily, unless you really want to get into it. But we'll be looking at some letters between Flint and Bretts, Flint and Thomas Large. So Flint and his major work in the Scablands is coming a decade after Harley, and we will then wrap both of these folks, Bretts and Flint, together in the 1952 notes by Bretts, where Bretts gets quite snarky, according to Glenn. I haven't read those notes very carefully yet. Okay, so that's that in the website, and you know how to get there. But if you go back, and if you go to Bretts, I don't know how much you've been doing this, but by now we've worked our way through the 20s with all these resources. Have you forgotten about this? Again, we're underneath Bretts, but if you haven't, I'm just going to be kind of purposeful today to let you know that every year now Sharon has collected all of these amazing newspaper clippings. She summarizes them in the first document, and then she's giving you each of the clippings. And occasionally Ken from Sandpoint is adding some stuff that she's then adding into these documents. And so one of the things I really want to do today, Sharon from Malaga has been brought up regularly, almost kind of casually, but it seems like I always kind of forget to get to her stuff by the time it's 3 hours, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to sign off. That's not happening today. Sharon from Malaga, thank you for all of the effort here. It adds so much rich detail. So I've taken a few of Sharon's newspaper clippings and gotten them into the slides to make sure that I don't overlook that. But I'm reminding you that almost every year there's Sharon stuff about Brett's, Sharon newspaper clippings about Thomas Large and his fellow teachers at Lewis and Clark High School. And then there's maps and there's other things that I will weave in here today. Okay, good. So let's get rid of that for now. And let's try to keep the pace going as fast as possible because there's a lot here. So I need to warn you, or I need to give you a pep talk. I don't know, are these old-timey stories and letters a favorite part of the series for you? Or is it something you just simply endure? Or maybe you click off. I don't really know. But there's enough of us, I'm confident of this, there's enough of it that love this rich detail coming from these old documents, courtesy of the University of Chicago, courtesy of the Eugene team at the University of Oregon, and other sources as well, that I want to keep going with this. I think I'm going to say it right now. It's been on my mind lately. I'll say it, and then we'll get to it. Early in the alphabet, if you remember, if you've been with us the whole series, this is back in early November, there were new viewers there, and they were confused why I was talking so much. Why wasn't I just giving them facts on the Missoula floods? You remember this? I was commenting on it a little bit. A lot of emails like, you're talking way too much. Just teach us the facts. And I think I know who those people are, but they're long gone. Okay, so their perspective is not super helpful here. Because the talking is a major part of what we're doing. I'm not just killing time. There's narratives and other things we've established. Okay, most of you that are still with the series understand that. So those folks are gone. But there's now a new crop of mostly emails from people who are on the other end of the spectrum. And they're emailing me and saying, I love what you're doing. I can't get enough of this series. You've never done anything like this before with all these documents and letters and narratives and human stuff. This has been a blast. But then some of those people continue with another paragraph and they say, I think you're making a mistake. You're putting all this stuff out for free. And all these documents and all these maps and all these field notes and other things. Somebody's going to take all that stuff and they're going to write a book, or they're going to make a screenplay, or they're going to do something else with your work. I think you should take all that stuff down and you should sit on it and you should capitalize on it somehow. So, I don't reply by email typically, but I'm replying right now collectively. It's more than a couple. It's quite a few emails saying this lately. Thank you for the feedback, number one. Number two, it's not most of it's not my work. It's the work of Sharon and Glenn and many of you who are sending things in. So it's a community effort. Number three, if somebody comes along and uses any of this stuff for academic purposes or any other reason, I'm happy with that. I got no interest in writing a book or writing a screenplay or capitalizing in any form on this stuff. It's free and open to anybody that wants to use it. That's what we're doing here. We're trying to renew interest from anybody who might want to come along and learn some new things about this story. So I don't think I am making a mistake. It's there for everybody to enjoy. He goes to the slides. Nick Zentner does on Third Person Thursday. And here is the featured document that will take up much of our time. And I have a document. I have a copy. I can't be sure, but I think my copy was gifted to me by Timothy Connor, who wrote this beautiful book. Here's a photo of Timothy Connor in the back. Timothy, maybe I'm not remembering correctly, but I think you're the one that sent me this copy of Bretz's book. Let's just page through it real quick. I'm sorry if I screwed that up, but I think it was you, Timothy, so thank you. This is the featured document and the main publication by J. Harlan Bretz in the 1930s. Now, that's familiar to us. I need to remind you about this organization. It's clearly a standalone thing. It's a book. By God, it's a book. It's a handsome book. This one's got a little bit of staining on it, but it's old, man. It's almost 100 years old. Published in 1932 by the American Geographical Society. And maybe your first instinct when you look at this is, oh my God, well, I guess Bretz didn't stop in 1929. Maybe he came out in 1930, in 1931, in 1932. Well, no, he didn't. Thanks to Sharon, thanks to Glenn, thanks to the notebooks, thanks to all sorts of sources, we know that he didn't come out and do a bunch more field work in the 1930s. But he was very motivated to put this beautiful map together. This beautiful book together because of the letters we're about to read. I want to give you some historical backstory on how this thing came to be. That's the main thing we're doing. But there's some other narratives as well. I'm looking forward to this. Okay. So, yes, I just demonstrated, but I want to remind you one more time. For today's episode, if you click on the word Bretz, you can get to our Sharon newspaper clippings from she's grouped a bunch of stuff from the 1930s, not just 1 year now, because again, Bretz isn't coming out in the 1930s every summer. And Thomas Large and Joseph McMacken and others, she kind of grouped together. You do have a digital version of the book that I just showed you, but it's not the highest quality. And that will come into our slides as well. Okay. I've only met Sharon from Malaga once, and I'm giving her proper credit here today. She lives in Malaga, as you well know. Malaga is on a beautiful landslide that came down into the Columbia. And Sharon helped coordinate getting Randy Lewis and I onto some land at the Stemilt Spires. And Randy and I did a video there. So that was the one and only time I met Sharon. But by email, I knew Sharon herself has some Native American background. And I emailed her quickly this morning, and she gave me a little backstory, and I thought it fit nicely into the theme of today's episode. So let's just quickly read a little bit of Sharon's backstory in the Wenatchee area. This is Sharon by email this morning. We're descended from Namamkin, a.k.a. Joseph, born in 1818. He spent his youth in the Ellensburg area and was the stepson of Chief Ojai. He had at least 5 wives, and one of them was our ancestor, Squaet-Kan Elks, and the Sanpoil tribe. Their daughter, Sinupk, a.k.a. Annie, born about 1844, married a white man named John Douglas Welsh, a professor from New York who had come to the Columbia Plateau after the Civil War to look for gold. He settled on a creek now named Welsh Creek near Creston and raised and educated his family there. He had 3 daughters and 3 sons. One of the daughters, Sally, was active as an interpreter for the allotments. Another daughter, Mary Jane, was married to a road builder named John McAllister and lived in Spokane when she was active in the Eagle Feathers Club. Sharon has all sorts of genealogy there, but I thought it was just fun to plug Sharon in a little bit to some of the local communities. Okay, from Sharon. April 1929, Spokane newspaper. Excursion ran into fine day. Palouse Falls party of 140 people had sunshine except near Spokane. People who braved the snow shower in Spokane. This is early April, for goodness sake, 1929. The spring before Bretz's last field season. people who braved the snow shower in Spokane yesterday morning to go on the Palouse Falls excursion found plenty of sunshine and a beautiful day down on the Snake River, where the special Union Pacific train stopped for the noon luncheon. The train carried 140 passengers from Spokane, less than half the number expected, had the day been pleasant at starting time. The train, which left Spokane in a snow squall at 8:30 in the morning, found the sun shining after passing Cheney, and the balance of the day pleasant with the exceptions of a few flakes of snow just after noon, while the party was at the falls. After crossing the high bridge over the Snake, the party alighted to eat their lunch and walk about, while the train proceeded to Ayer Junction to be turned around. The sun shone brightly during this new lunch period of an hour or so. The return trip was in sunshine until again the train got within 15 or 20 miles of Spokane. In the party were a group of Trail Club and the Mountaineers Club and the geology classes of Professor J.G. McMacken and Professor Thomas Large of the Lewis and Clark High School. The special arrived in Spokane at 6 o'clock. If you go to Sharon's newspaper clippings, there's a lot of those kinds of reports. I think Large in particular was the Pied Piper of this geology in eastern Washington. He was coordinating and communicating with Bretz and Flint and these others, but he was also shepherding people out to these sites. I think he was a gifted public educator, not just at the high school, but had a real knack of working with the Chamber of Commerce and the Northwest Scientific Association, which he founded. So he was in the middle of all of this. And not everybody can kind of feel comfortable in all of those communities and make it all work. But I think he was one of those guys. Thomas Large, Spokane, Washington. Here's another one. Late July 1929. Scientists marvel at Inland Empire geology. Spokane newspaper. The Inland Empire is becoming the favorite field study area for American scientists. Professor Harold Bretz of the Geology Department, University of Chicago, has been bringing classes here for several years and is back again with another group. He is pursuing here a theory that sudden melting of a great glacial cap started stupendous torrents swirling over this region, washing away much soil deposit and leaving the so-called scabland areas. R.J. Holden. Why do they call Holden Village at the Lake Chelan area? Is it somehow tied to this Professor Holden? I really don't know. Curious. Professor Holden of Virginia Polytechnic Institute, who is touring the West with 18 members of the class of geology, this is in the summer of 29, told the Wenatchee Chamber of Commerce last week that Professor Bretz is probably the greatest living authority on the Grand Coulee. The course taken by the Professor Holden's party was along the Mississippi to St. Paul, thence west through the Dakotas, Montana, and Wyoming to visit Yellowstone and Glacier National Parks. Professor Holden said at Wenatchee that the Grand Coulee to us was the most interesting and inspiring study of all. Why am I bothering you with this? This is some random guy from the East Coast teaching a geology class and bringing his students out here. The newspaper account continues with something that I'd never heard before. Maybe you have. I hadn't, involving the Grand Coulee. What is it? Alexander Ross, who as an attaché of the Pacific Fur Company, the Northwest Company of Canada, and the Hudson's Bay Company, spent 44 years of his life without a single day's intermission in the Indian territories of North America, the first 15 years in the region of the Columbia, recorded the same judgment in his authoritative work, The Fur Hunters of the Far West. In 1814, Ross traveled from Okanagan to Spokane House. On our way, both going and coming, we made a short stay at a place called the Grand Coulee. This is 1814, for goodness sake. One of the most romantic, picturesque, and marvelously formed chasms west of the Rocky Mountains. No one traveling in these parts ought to resist paying a visit to the wonder of the West. The whole presents in every respect the appearance of the deep bed of a great river or lake, now dry, scooped out on the level and barren plain. The sight in many places is truly magnificent. According to Indian tradition, it is the abode of evil spirits. Altogether, it is a charming assemblage of picturesque objects for the admirer of nature. It is the wonder of the Oregon Territory. So that's new to me. Usually the reports of the early days, quote unquote, of getting into the Grand Coulee goes back to, I think, Samuel Parker and then Simons and Russell and those guys, Willis. But 1814, this guy's writing about the Grand Coulee. That's more than 100 years before our buddy Harley is going to be making his book in 1932. Keep it going. Okay, you remember the procedure now. I'm going to read some letters, and I want to remind you visually who's writing to whom. So this is an exchange between Bretts and Flint, and we'll try to go in order. I think we're still in the late 20s, but by the time we're done today, we'll be to the late 1930s. Hang in there, everybody. Hang in there, Nick. Find the right button. You'll get it one of these days. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I forgot. So I mentioned briefly in the last episode that Thomas from the University of Washington, whether he's a student or faculty member, I'm not sure yet. Thomas emailed and said, we've got a whole cabinet full of these old Brett's papers, and we don't know what to do with them, but I think we're cleaning up. Well, since that first email, Brian Atwater's gotten a hold of this, and so Atwater's probably going to intervene and make sure those papers stay at the University of Washington, I think, and are kept properly in the right location, and that would be great. But again, Thomas took a photo of the cover of each of these papers, and I think it's fun to just look at them quickly because you have the digital form of all these Brett's papers in the 1920s, but I've never seen, until right now, courtesy of Thomas in Seattle, I've never seen the original covers on these papers. And you remember the punchline from last episode. It wasn't just some random dude who owned these papers. It was Richard Foster Flint. Dick Flint. Here's the submergence paper. J. Harlan Brett's sending a copy to Richard Foster Flint. Compliments of the author. I mean, I guess Flint is still an undergrad at University of Chicago at that point. Property of Richard Foster Flint. Again, I think these got into the hands of Stephen Porter at the University of Washington, one of the star former students of Flint. Harley autographing the reprint. This is Flint's handwriting, 1924. Harley autographing a reprint sent to, that's just the custom of the day. You publish a paper and you have, I guess, hundreds of copies of your paper, and you literally send autographed copies to all of your fellow geologists around the country, maybe around the world. Isn't this fun to see these? Now, this is a developing story with these old papers because Thomas's original email said there's some scratches or some little chicken scratch or some little notes, hand-drawn notes in the margins of some of these papers. And I'm like, I'd like to see that. Could you take a few photos of that? And Brian Atwater emailed pretty quickly after that and said, I've looked at those things. I don't see any little notes. But they're Flint's papers, and if Flint is like basically jotting some notes in the field with him with these papers, that would be a fun development. But we're maybe not going to get there with Thomas. Here's the ambush meeting. This is what the published cover looks like. I didn't know that existed. We haven't really looked at this, but you have this at nickzentner.com, one of the first imprint arguments against Brett's and then Brett's replying. Flint's got that. Now, who wrote this? I think this is Flint's handwriting. What does it say? It's kind of smudged. alternate, that doesn't look like a typo to me, but is Flint putting in an N for some reason? And I think this says the most informative single paper. So this is the paper, if we back up, this is the paper that Bretz is writing as a direct result of the ambush meeting. So if Flint is writing this and he thinks this is the single most paper, that's kind of interesting, because what is Flint going to be doing a decade later? Joining the crowd in arguing rather vehemently against Bretz's flood idea. I find these fascinating because, to me, you can correct me, but to me, these were taken out into the field. For those of us that do field work on occasion, things get beaten up, you spill water on it, it's sun-baked and everything else, and sometimes you use duct tape to keep the frickin' thing together as it's in your pack. But I love the visual, whether it's correct or not, that Flint is packing these things around as he's doing his field work in the 1930s. This is the text that accompanied the beautiful, colorful map that we looked at last time. For Dick Flint, compliments, J. Harlan Bretz. Again, pretty beaten up. Those don't look like papers that were just sitting on his shelf in New Haven, Connecticut. Isn't this fun? That's the one I showed you last time. J. Harlan Bretz's little autograph. Even his East Greenland study, which we'll finish with today. Okay, so to the big paper, to the big book. What's the story behind that book? Letter time. February 1930. Now, Bretz isn't coming back, remember? The field work is done in eastern Washington. Bretz. Dear Dr. Bowman, in New York City, you will recall my article, Channeled Scabland of Eastern Washington, in the 1927 volume of the Review. You will also recall that I have been severely criticized for my hypothesis. It will interest you to learn that my critics have largely lost interest or become cautious during the past 2 years and cannot now be stimulated to make comments. Studies of 3 phases of the problem, made since 1927, the ambush meeting, have supplied new kinds of data which have considerably dampened their inquisitorial ardor. I am now laboring under an urge to write an article on Grand Coulee itself. I spent about 2 weeks there last summer, 1929, and have at last succeeded in getting essentially complete picture of its amazing features and history. These pictures exceed anything I have ever before conceived of, and my previous views have been large. You saw, I believe, only the upper coulee and Dry Falls, the great abandoned cataract. The lower coulee, extending from this cataract southward to the Quincy Structural Basin, far and away surpasses the upper in extraordinary features. It is not simply a great canyon, but a distributary system of canyons, superimposed on 3 pre-glacial stream valleys and their divides, themselves developed in terms of 3 anticlines and 3 synclines that are still dominant features of the topography. Okay, I got to pause. Yeah, are these old letters? Sure they are. Is this Bretz from Chicago writing to a guy in New York trying to convince him to fund making a new book? Yeah, it is. But in addition to that, these letters are helpful specifically for me. Let me explain. I've been leading field trips with Carl Loquist to the Grand Coulee. I've lost track of how many times we've gone up there. At the Bacon whatever and the this and the Dry Coulee and the Billy Clap Lake and the Great Blade and all these things. And I never totally got the significance of not only the lower Grand Coulee, but that scabland to the east of the lower Grand Coulee. I never got it until that last paragraph in that typed letter. The fact that there's a distributary channel and that the floodwater coming down through the Grand Coulee is splitting into fingers as it fills 3 different pre-glacial dendritic V-shaped river valleys. I just never had that. So the elegance of a simple paragraph like that worked for me. And so there's many people writing different styles that are oftentimes talking about the same geology concepts. But based on when, it's the timing, first of all. When are you reading that thing? Are you reading it when you're just starting to think about an area? Well, then it's probably going over your head. I'm just talking about myself. If you've been thinking about the area for 5 years and you keep reading the same paper and the same paper and the same paper, maybe it kind of works, but you know the phrases by heart and it still doesn't quite stick. Talk about myself. But it is a jolt and a fun discovery to go, well, that wasn't that hard. I just never quite got it. And something like this letter that says if you go to the Lower Grand Coulee, it's not simply one canyon, but it's 3 canyons in 3 pre-glacial stream valleys, and their divides themselves developed because there's 3 anticlines and 3 synclines. Man, fun. Brett, still talking to Bowman in New York City, who I don't know if he has any interest or not at this point. We made a recon, topographical, and geological map of this tract last summer, 1929, with a 50-foot contour interval. It includes the abandoned cataract and shows strikingly the structural control, the pre-glacial drainage, and superimposed distributary canyons cut by the glacial waters. 2 of the structural valleys contain immense gravel bar deposits on the divides between the canyons. Good Lord, man, there's gravel bars on the divides? One bar is nearly 200 feet thick, and the canyons on either side are cut 200 feet below its base. All are contemporaneous channel features. Evidence for this is simply irresistible. Another startling thing, Bowman, shown on the map and the new photographs, is the existence of 2 parallel canyon channels of the main lower coulee, the shallower one being a modified pre-glacial valley, the deeper one entirely a product of glacial waters. I'm coming back again. I am now wrong. I need to write a letter to every student and old person that I've taken on a field trip up in the Lower Grand Coulee. And I would say, as we're driving by Lake Lenoir, please look at the hanging valleys hanging above the west wall of the Lower Grand Coulee. We're downstream of Dry Falls. Everybody, take some notes now. Those side valleys went all the way to the floor of this Lower Grand Coulee. And this was a pre-glacial valley coming right down here through the Lower Grand Coulee itself. I was wrong. Did you catch it in the letter? And it's reinforced in the book? The bottom of the pre-glacial valley was to the east of the Lower Grand Coulee. And you're like, I think I'm lost. Well, Brett's is about to add to his letter by sketching on letterhead these relationships as he's coaching up this city slicker in New York City. But the main coulee, containing Lake Lenoir and at least 300 feet lower, lie wholly in the steeper limb of the fold. There's an asymmetric syncline there. Thus, the western tributaries are left hanging 500 feet above the main coulee. The divide between the 2 parallel spillways is continuous for 4 miles and is in some places as much as 100 feet higher than shown in the accompanying cross-section. Its summit, where broad enough, has strongly expressed scabland, buttes, and rock basins. I can only imagine this guy Isaiah Bowman, who's not a geologist, like just scanning this in his letter in Manhattan. Like, this guy's going on and on. I don't follow any of this. That's my imagination of this. This guy's just trying to decide if he's going to fund a new book or not. Maybe I'm not giving Bowman enough credit. Apparently, the extensive fracturing of the steeply tilted basalt on the west limb of the fold determined the glacial plucking there more than the nearly flat-lying places. The whole double coulee here is channel bottom. The main channel has been altered very little by any glacial discharge since the higher eastern one was in use. This is proved by the occurrence of an abandoned cataract, not simply a hanging relationship nearly 100 feet higher at the junction of the two channels. Furthermore, a large bar here on one side of the channel, in the alcove made by the cataract's recession, rises from the rock floor below to the rock floor above. Indeed, it is a local depositional extension of the channel floor above the cataract. This relationship establishes the cataract as subfluvial, like Celilo Falls near the Dalles, Oregon, during the Columbia's flood season. It completely debars the alternative that these valleys are waterways, not channels. So he's still smarting from the ambush meeting. Grand Coulee is being boosted as a tourist attraction by the Spokane Chamber of Commerce, the organization which contributed nearly $200 toward the map of Scabland, which you published, color, in 1927. This organization is willing to back the attempt to depict the Grand Coulee, and I have asked them to have some good aeroplane photographs taken. This they promise to do when I can show that such photographs will be used. There are no such photographs as yet. An excellent highway is under construction through Lower Coulee and will shortly become a part of the state's main auto roads. Dry Falls, now a state park. Then he goes on to talk about the dam, which is being in progress. My map can be reproduced adequately on once folded insert and without color. I have not written the paper yet, but it need not be long. Would the review be interested in it? Pretty please? Very truly yours, Harlan Bretz. So this letter was sent to me with a couple of others in this Bowman collection from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee's Special Collections Library. I think it was Ian who found this and sent it to me last summer. Thank you, Ian. Hope I got the name right. In the letter, here's Bretz just freehanding the former preglacial valley. So you're looking north. Here's Lake Lenoir and the lower Grand Coulee. Here's this Great Blade and this Scabland to the east of the Great Blade, which hardly anybody goes into. I was in there once with Tom Foster. We just parked on the shoulder above Lake Lenoir and then threaded through one little gap, which was kind of precarious. But here's Brett showing a, if I can read this, cross-section of Grand Coulee near mid-length of Lake Lenoir, looking north up valley. But it gets better than this. Here's a map that he's freehanding on stationery of Lake Lenoir and some contour lines showing this, the former preglacial valley floor, and then this thing totally carved by Spokane floodwater. And it gets better yet. Look at this thing. Ian, thank you. This is one piece of stationery from the University of Chicago, and Brett's has got the colored pencils out now and the drafting pens. And here's the cataract at Dry Falls and Deep Lake. And the main Lower Coulee comes over here, but here's Lenoir Canyon. And Pinto Ridge with some loess. He's got the yellow pencil for this. The axis of the lower anticline. What treasures these are to find. And if this was in a paper, I'd be excited about it, but it's simply just in a letter. Here's a little bit more blown up version of this. To me, it's extremely fun to learn brand new things from sources that are not the typical way to learn things, which is a textbook or a scientific paper. These are letters that nobody ever dreamed anybody would see, I don't think. I don't know. Is anybody going to see my emails I send to Sky Coulee? Hopefully not. Well, Bretz gets a reply within a couple of weeks from Bowman. Dear Mr. Bretz, I'm very much pleased with your letter, which brings back my visit to the Grand Coulee in 1912 as a member of the Transcontinental Excursion. No, we went much farther down the Coulee than you seem to think, traveling clear through to its southern end. I can see that you've spotted some highly important features, and I can only say that the review would be very deeply interested in whatever you prepare. We should be pleased indeed if airplane photographs could be taken. They ought to provide a stunning picture of this extraordinary feature. And then details. Also, would not this mode of treatment be an added inducement to the Spokane Chamber of Commerce to take the photographs that you need? The more strictly physiographic section of the paper would then follow and could be developed in the way that you propose. Sometime during August, I expect to be in the vicinity of the coulee and hope to drive along its floor again. Sincerely, Isaiah Bowman, New York City. Keep it going. Brett's to Large. Now we're in the fall of 1930. Dear Large, at last the decision of the committee on the western excursion of the International Geological Congress has been made, and they will spend probably 2 days on the Scabland. I shall insist that Grand Coulee be adequately examined. Perhaps also we can see something of the Moses Lake country. Possibly I can get them to detrain at Wenatchee and see some of the marvelous bars at the mouth of Moses Coulee and thence down to Crater Coulee, or Crater Cataract. I was very pleasantly surprised by the interest shown in allotting 2 days instead of the 1 I asked for. I dared not ask for more. Indeed, I was not sure I would get the 1. Someone on the committee seems stuck on the idea of traveling via Northern Pacific. I am all for the Great Northern Route. Northern Pacific means a long automobile trip over from Ritzville, or a train trip up from Connell on that miserable line to Adrian. If Northern Pacific is chosen, Wenatchee will be out of it, and Moses Coulee. I'm very eager to get a paper written on the coulee before the trip. The Geographical Review wants to print it, but I have held off writing it until the USGS mapping of the upper coulee was complete, and until aeroplane photographs have been taken. The Brubaker Company of Portland took the pictures, but only for the USGS. And they flew too high to get the kind of pictures that I want. I think that I shall have to go back to the Spokane Chamber of Commerce and see if they will finance a real flight over the lower coulee. DeLong was full of big ideas, or big words, late last winter, about some projected movie pictures of the coulee, taken from a traveling auto. I haven't heard anything about the project. Have you? He promised me any pictures I want to use. The trip I want to make with the excursion party will involve getting up on the western brink by the road up Sheep Canyon from Soap Lake. I think I told you about the great double channel seen from here. Now he's going on the double channel thing again, and here's another sketch showing the same frickin' thing. It's a marvel for the evidence of is good that the shallower eastern one of the original preglacial valley and the Lake Lenoir Gorge is an affair entirely by the glacial flood. Evidence lies in the relationship of the non-scabland tributaries off of the hills on either side, like this. The location of the preglacial course is in the very axis of the downfold, as it should be. But the glacial torrent, notice he's not calling it the Spokane flood, by the way, the glacial torrent with plucking ability transcending anything I've yet seen in this wonderful scabland region tore out its major channel from the steeply tilted and much fractured flows in the monocline to the west. Once I can establish this, my case is absolutely unassailable. A letter the other day from William Morris Davis. Okay, how we doing? Everything going okay? We're down to 815. That's plenty. You want to stick with me till the end? I'm going to keep going even if we're below 100. I just want to share this stuff. And no, I still haven't quite decided how I'm going to deal with these letters and if I'm going to publish them or post them or put them all together. I don't still quite know how to do that. But this is the first step, just sharing these things. And yes, these letters are a combination of being sourced at the University of Chicago, like these are, and the Eugene Dream Team and others. But now Brett's is talking to Large and saying, hey, I got a convert. I heard from a convert, and it's in 1930. I got a letter the other day. Hey, Large, check this out. I got a letter the other day from William Morris Davis. He's been at Eugene, Oregon during the summer. This is 1930. And at the close of the summer session, he ran over to see Grant Cooley. He actually went up there. Listen. He writes in part, quote, as a consequence of seeing the enormous gravel and cobble bars on the lava plains east of Cooley City, I, William Morris Davis, have become much more persuaded of the correctness of your flood theory than I was before. It is just as you intimate in your papers, seeing is believing. There seems to be no question that the bars are initial forms, insignificantly modified, and not merely remnants of a much larger deposit, as some of your critics have suggested. I was especially impressed by the flood bars near Stratford and again south of Soap Lake. At the latter locality, it seems as if a heavy sheet of gravels had been washed into the path previously occupied by the Columbia below the Cooley City Gorge. But this is the only impression gained in rapid passage. Both in the Grand Cooley below Cooley City and in Moses Cooley farther west, I saw several huge bars in the summer of 1930 in impossible situations. Nothing but a flood seemed capable of building them, end quote. Thomas, how's that for good news, huh? And do you think I will fail to let certain gentlemen, none too gentle, know the good doctor's opinion? Well, you're wrong. After 1932, there will be more confessions. Does he mean conversions? I have a new paper out this summer, Valley Deposits immediately west of the Scablands, Moses Cooley, Trinidad. Separates won't be available for a month yet, but look for one. My work this summer, the summer of 1930, was for the Illinois State Survey, and it was to replace the old Chicago folio with a new bulletin by the state. The work is quite different from that of previous summers, obviously out in eastern Washington, but has proven quite interesting. The numerous concrete highways here in the Chicago area have afforded many good cuts and much new information. The work will take all of next summer and perhaps even part of the summer of 1932. Thus, while Alden revises me on the Scablands, I revise him here, because he wrote the Chicago folio. By the way, wouldn't it have been nice if Alden had come out the way Davis has? Why hasn't he? 1, natural caution of the man. 2, question mark. A lull in the work of my field course here at Devils Lake, Wisconsin has afforded me the first opportunity of weeks, nay months, to write you. Must close now and thank Davis for his fine letter. So that was a big moment for Harley. A letter from a respected geologist who had published in 1920 on the flood deposits in northern Idaho and western Montana. This guy finally going out there to take a look at Grand Cooley and saying, hey man, you were right. And Bretz was, I think, just craving that from other geologists as well. But Davis was the first. Ignore the phone. Thank you. Back to Bretz and Bowman in New York City. Now we're in early November, October, late October. Dear Dr. Bowman, you will recall that late last winter I wrote you concerning a proposed article on Grand Cooley. Other demands arose shortly after this letter was written, and as yet I have no opportunity to begin the paper, but I can now go ahead with it. I have secured a few airplane photographs, or portions of the Cooley, taken by different men on different flights, but none, I think, which are especially what I want, for illustrating the article. Arrangements now underway promise shortly to provide airplane photographs taken according to my own ideas. There's more to the letter, but I feel like I want to go back to my copy of this book and show you what he ended up with, because it is a rather impressive collection of aerial photographs, which goes against the typical story of Bretz. You know the typical story? I've said this before. Brett's never got up in the air. He never saw the scablands from the air. If he'd only seen it from the air, he could have showed those things to his critics and they would have shut up. Well, he's right. He's publishing the book in 1932. He's putting major effort to find just the right air photos to go with the book. Flint and everybody else has read the book. That's not shutting him up. They're still criticizing Brett. The air photos are not the smoking gun that convinced everybody. See, let's get rid of that narrative, please. So I'm coming back to show you this book that we're kind of behind the scenes trying to figure out. But let me just skip to a couple. So there's some beautiful ground photos. Of course, many of these, so photographed by Curtis. Oh man, is that Ashel Curtis maybe? Or Ashel Curtis? Or his brother? Photographed by Simmer. I mean, I love these photos. This, of course, this is all before Banks Lake. This is all before the Grand Coulee Dam was put in to flood the upper Grand Coulee. But the real features here, this and other vertical aerial photographs were taken at altitude about 11,000 feet. Grand Coulee Series 33 by the USGS. Okay, so I guess these are the ones that he was talking smack about. He said they're too high, but I guess he did include a couple of them. Yeah. Oblique aerial photograph by Libby and Son. Yeah, I think he wanted, so he eventually found Libby and Son, and he said, look, I mean, I've had these conversations. If I'm working with somebody with a camera and they can fly a drone, I think their instinct is just to do it perfectly anyway, but sometimes, if I don't know them very well, I feel like I have to verbalize. I think what Brett's was verbalizing to these folks in the airplanes. It's like, I don't want vertical. I don't want looking straight down. There's a sweet spot between straight down when you take photographs of a landscape and eye level. There's like these low angles that can make these things pop. And usually when I say that to a photographer, then they're like, are you done? Are you done telling me how to do my job? You think I've never thought of that before? Mr. Big Shot? Are we done? And I go, yeah, we're done. We have drones now that can get these shots, but it was major effort to get these. Yeah, we're at Dry Falls here. Here's the Umatilla Rock. So I can only imagine how exciting this was just as a general enthusiast of landscapes in the American West. I mean, how many books existed like this by 1932 to show these places from the air like this? This does feel new. I mean, flash forward a couple decades later and Jon Shelton. Wasn't planning on this, but I'm just kind of riffing now. So for me personally, I don't know about you, for me personally, this book was influential. Jon Shelton, I don't know much about. You can probably help me. But I think he was a geology professor that also flew airplanes, and he had a knack. Oh, here he is. He had a knack back in the 60s, I guess. All right, Jon Shelton. Graduate of Pomona College, got his doctorate from Yale. Oh boy, here we go. Totally unplanned. I promise, this is real. This is, I wasn't planning on doing this. I just read that with you. Was Jon Shelton a student of Flint? Wow. So this is Jon Shelton, Geology Illustrated is the book. And somebody sent me this copy. I appreciate it. Graduate of Pomona, doctorate in geology from Yale, USGS, full-time, part-time, taught at Pomona. And then since 1960, he kind of had this knack, and he thinks, I think there's an audience for this stuff, so I'm going to become a chief scientific advisor to the elementary earth science program of the American Geological Institute. And he started flying in 1939 and started putting these books together. So this one I remember seeing for the first time when I was an undergraduate in Madison. I think somebody had it in their office or whatever. And totally elegant way to show geology, which of course resonates with a lot of people. We now have drones, and one of the best coffee table books that exists now is this book by Bruce Norman Bjornstad, and this came out in the last couple of years. And in addition to Bruce's beautiful YouTube channel, which is free, of course, to anybody, you can buy this coffee table book where Bruce has gone out with just the right light, and he has really developed some incredible aerial photographs, not from an airplane, but from flying a drone. He's taught himself how to fly a drone and get some of these stunning shots. Thanks. That was a little departure. Kind of fun. Let's go back to the letters. Boy, where was I? Since I last wrote, however, this is Brett's to Bowman. Since I last wrote, however, the USGS has made a map of the floor of the coulee above Dry Falls, and the photolithograph proof is not yet out, but I am confident that I can redraw it in combination with my own map of the lower coulee and make a good reconnaissance topographic map of the entire feature. Okay, let's move on. You may be interested to know that the excursion of the 1932 International Geological Congress, obviously I wouldn't keep bringing this up if that wasn't going to be part of our story, will spend 2 days in the Grand Coulee under my guidance. Richard Field of Princeton has charge of the itinerary. I have promised him that separates of the proposed article for the review will serve as guidebooks for the visit. You will be interested, Mr. Bowman, also to learn that William Morris Davis saw part of the Grand Coulee and environs this summer, and he quotes Davis in his letter. I won't read it again. Davis is now in California, and I learned from Blackwelder that he is announcing his conversion, in large part due to the Spokane hypothesis. I have been confident of this result all through the controversy. Doubters have been reading uncritically and have been carrying their picture of deeply eroded waterways as necessarily valleys, right through all the evidence that these scabland waterways are not valleys. I recall your mentioning last February that you hoped to see the Grand Coulee this summer. I wonder if your plans were carried through, and if so, what you thought as a result of your re-inspection. Very truly yours, J. Harlan Bretz. Okay, now we got some letters between Flint and Bretz. This is from University of Chicago Archives. Thank you, Natalie. Late December 1930. Flint, writing Bretz. Dear Bretz, I would like to ask you a question or two concerning geomorphic features on the Arlington Quadrangle of the Columbia River. Now remember, Flint is trying to build his own career at Yale. He's collecting these old papers by Bretz. He's writing that, this one's really important, and it's the one where there's alternative thoughts to Bretz's flood. And Flint is ramping up to go to all these sites that Bretz had double and triple checked. And Flint, for whatever reason, is motivated to write paper after paper in the 1930s to say that his former mentor is crazy. He's asking for advice here in 1930. Why is Alder Creek in the northeastern corner of the area out of adjustment with the general southwestward slope of the surface? Are the meanders of the John Day River incised, or does the course of the stream represent merely developed during a single cycle? Bretz, what is the real cause of the change in drainage that resulted in the development of the Dry Valley Alkali Canyon? Some questions have come up in my discussion group in geomorphology relative to this area, and I would be very grateful indeed if you would give me the lowdown on it. Sincerely, and with many thanks, Dick Flint. Okay, Brett's going to talk to Large. Dear Large, 1931, as my paper on the Grand Coulee has grown and the illustrative material I already have has been worked into it, I have come to the conclusion that I really needed no more. Of course, many items might be better shown than in Libby's rather muddy photos. Okay, well, so much for him liking Libby. I guess he's talking shit about Libby's photos. I might use a few others of those that I am building into it. But all told, I have given up the idea of another attempt at getting airplane photos. So he never was happy with his air photos. The paper now has the absolute maximum loading of illustrative material, or illustrative material. Next week, we'll see its completion and mailing to the review. It's a big paper, much longer than I thought it would be, longer than I fear Bowman will want. But it is a Jim dandy, if I do say so as shouldn't. I have that case of shifting over into the monocline along Lake Lenore very well illustrated and organized. I doubt if any hard-boiled critic can successfully combat the evidence of the hanging tributaries on the west side. And for the upper coulee, I have developed a hypothesis since I last wrote you that beats anything in the lower Grand Coulee. I start a cataract at the monocline, north of Coulee City, and erode the whole upper canyon by its recession. I carry a running comparison with Niagara, Goat Islands, plunge pool basins, lateral subsidiary cataracts like American Falls, etc., all the way through. You will be surprised, and I was amazed, to find that there are lateral cataracts along the upper Grand Coulee that themselves are as wide as Niagara, and of course several times as high. Barker Canyon's one, Northrop Canyon's another. The vertical photos of the USGS make the case clear beyond peradventure of a doubt. Then you will recall that the great width of the upper coulee about Steamboat Rock. This cannot be explained by anything other than a widening of the cataract to 5 miles. And for that widening, no change in rock, in height, or in preglacial topography will do. It was here, in the making of the coulee, that the Spokane flood arrived. For 10 miles of retreat, the flood lasted. Then the river dropped back to its former size, and so finished the coulee on through to the Columbia, narrowed to its proportions from the monocline north for 11 miles. Using Niagara as a basis, the flood through Grand Coulee was at least 12 times what the glacial river was before and after. The map is very striking. I am hoping for early publication, but there will be lots of drafting to do, and it may be summer before the paper is in print. Please pardon brevity and haste. Best regards, Brett's. Are you getting whiplash? I'm trying to just keep things in order by month and year. Brett's and Flint. Here's Flint needing more help. February 31. If Brett's only knew this guy was going to he's looking for ammunition, basically. Dear Brett, you ought to receive within 3 or 4 days a copy of my immortal work on the glacial geology of Connecticut. The reason you have not received one before is that your name was on the original list to receive the copies. I am hoping very much that you will be interested enough in the paper to be willing to take time to give it a little review in the University of Chicago's Journal of Geology. I know from experience that if I merely send a copy to the journal in care of R.T. Chamberlain, it will be buried for good. So in Flint's mind, Brett's is the good guy, and T.C. Chamberlain's son is the guy who's just going to bury it. What happened there? What happened between Chamberlain, Sr. and Jr., Brett's, and Flint in the early 20s? While admitting that I am prejudiced, I believe that this book contains material that is both new and striking, and that it will be of interest to glacial geologists who read the journal. Check this out. Dick Flint. Hey, Bretts, I recently got a very sympathetic letter from William Morris Davis about the whole thing, my thing about Connecticut, and thus I feel much as you did, after you had largely convinced him of the true and only origin of the channeled scablands. With plenty of good wishes, yours, Dick Flint. By the way, immoral would be better than immortal, but almost as good a word since the argument involves dissipation. So what the heck is Flint telling Bretts? I got a cool letter too. Davis liked my stuff too. And I have the same feeling that you did after you largely convinced him of the true and only origin. The true and only origin. Is this sarcasm from Flint? You've got the only true origin of the channeled scablands. Is he mocking him? Am I reading wrong? Or is he really honestly mean? Does Flint, right before he writes these alternative critical papers against Bretts, what's the tone of this? Fascinating. Bretts to Large. Postcard, February 6, 1932. Large, I'm broadcasting a little spiel next February 12th at 11:45 Central Standard Time on the radio. Nothing of importance. Luck invites me. I accept. See you in Pullman in June. From Sharon in Malaga. Dr. Bretts, poor publicity agent. Dr. J. Harlan Bretts of the University of Chicago, who has spent many summers unraveling the remarkable geologic history of the Grand Coulee of the Columbia, may be a top-line rock hunter, but as a personal press agent for himself, he's not so hot. L.K. Armstrong, secretary of the Northwest Mining Association, today displayed a postcard received from Bretts reading as follows. If you shouldn't hear me over the Columbia Network on February 12th at 9:45 a.m. Spokane time, you won't be missing much. Well, that's a little different than the postcard that Large got, so Bretts is just firing off these postcards basically saying, I'm going to be on the radio. You should listen. And by the way, it's going to suck. Okay, maybe this is getting stale for you. I don't know. Letter after letter after letter. But I'm purposely trying to throw in some other things as well, just to change things up. So that postcard from Bretts, both to Large and Armstrong, letting him know about this, I guess, nationwide radio program. Got an email from Larry. Forgot where you live, Larry. Sorry. Nick, if this Bretts radio thing was broadcast over the Columbia Network, it is likely that it was recorded on a transcription disc that each station would then play at the designated time. There were lots of discs saved, but being 1932, this is close to when the network started. Prior to this and after this, but fading. Much of the programming was live. The transcription discs were the internet of those days. It would take a number of steps and lots of luck, but maybe you could find this radio broadcast. Maybe somebody who's watching this could figure this out. And I'll let you freeze the frame if you feel like you want to look into this at all. This would be a real long shot. But Larry has some thoughts on possibly how somebody could look for some sort of archived record of this Bretts radio program. The crowd power you have may help find this for others much more recent with Bretts and other geologists. Just an idea. Thank you, Larry, for that idea. And I mentioned this briefly a couple of shows ago, but I'll mention it right now. I have a I have a video interview with Rudolph Bretz, recorded in the mid-1990s, just a few years before Rudolph Bretz passed away. And Rudy Bretz was the only son of Jay Harlan. And it was Rudy Bretz who was out in the field in the summers of each of the, from 1925 to 1929, Rudy was with his dad and these University of Chicago students. And the only reason I mention it is because the family's not comfortable with me sharing it with everybody for privacy matters with the family, and I understand that. But Richard Waite, our guest next Thursday, was in the living room when this thing was recorded. And I happened to test the AV with Richard yesterday because we're trying to get Richard up and running with the technology for his appearance next Thursday. And I mentioned that interview. And Richard Waite said, there was some good stuff in that interview. I remember that interview. But the thing I remember most, this is Richard Waite talking about sitting in and listening to Rudy Bretz talk. Richard Waite said that the thing I remember the most was the sound of Rudy Bretz's voice, and his speech pattern was exactly like Jay Harlan Bretz, like his dad. So maybe I'll bring that up a little bit with Richard next week, but Richard said you could just close your eyes and listen to Rudy talk, and it's just like listening to Harley talk, because Richard, in addition to Vic Baker, visited Bretz at his home in Homewood, Illinois, late in his life. Kind of fun. I'm not done, believe it or not. So more viewer help. This is the folded out beautiful map in the back of the book, of the 1932 book. And here's Ken, I think this morning, or maybe last night, I forget, Ken, by email. Nick, the provided PDF of the Bretz 1932 Grand Coulee paper does not have a fold-out map. Here's a nice copy. I cut it out of my book, ironed it, and took it to my wife's office to scan on a large format copier. I do have a higher quality TIFF that I could mail you if you want. My copy is definitely better than the one I downloaded for Washington State University's special collection. I will send them a clean copy too. Ken. So thank you, Ken. Ken's talking about this map. So Ken, to benefit all of us, carefully cut out his map out of the back of his copy of this Bretz book and ironed it and scanned it. And I took what Ken sent me, and I think I made it into a PDF, or maybe it was already a PDF, I forget, Ken, and I posted it. It's under Bretz. So the 1932 colorful map by Bretz is waiting for you to enjoy, courtesy of Ken in Sandpoint, Idaho. Thank you, Ken. Back to the story. Now we're actually revealing the book and starting to sell the book in March of 1932. The book we've been talking about more or less for the last 30 minutes. New volume tells story of Grand Coulee geography. $4 for a new copy of the Grand Coulee book by J. Harlan Bretz. Professor Bretz admits that he's a nut on the Grand Coulee country of central Washington. He's been all over the area, frequently visits, etc. He's explored every nook and cranny. The new book, just released, is a deluxe volume in many ways, bound in boards, 89 pages on glossy paper, profusely illustrated with reproductions of remarkable airplane photographs of all the outstanding surface manifestations of prehistoric upheavals. A set of stereographic pictures accompanies the volume. Is that in here? Yep. So my copy, again, I think sent to me by Timothy. Not only is there the book, the map in the back, but there are these stereographic views. So, Bowman really came through I guess Brett's kept asking for all this illustrative material, as I think he was calling it. And if you're unfamiliar, the skill of the day or the trick of the day in laboratories, even when I was a young student, was to have stereo glasses propped over these photos. And you would look one eyeball on this and one eyeball on that, and looking at them together looks three-dimensional. Felt like magic in 1984, and I guess in 1932 as well. So what are we doing? We're just adding to the Missoula flood story. In this case, we're kind of, in a way, studying Brett's outreach. He's not doing any new research now. He's just trying to get more eyes on the Grand Coulee area, and ultimately, I suppose, why do I do some of this stuff? It feels good. It feels good to just put stuff out there and receive love coming back. And I'm pretty sure Brett's wouldn't say it like that. But I can speculate that Brett's was not getting a lot of acceptance, reverence within the peers and the geologists around the country. If he goes to a GSA meeting, he's kind of this joke. Wasn't it Large talking about that last time? So here's another audience that might give something back. Maybe all these public appearances are just a way to find some audience that's going to appreciate what you've done, at least in some form. Okay, now I'm really speculating and getting personal as well. Yeah. I think we're almost done. Yes, the Pullman meeting. So in June of 1932, in the Spokane paper, there's going to be 4 field trips in 3 days. Scientists are going to be shown areas of academic interest. The Washington State College in Pullman, Washington. 4 short excursions planned for members of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. I don't think that's the same as the Northwest Society, the Northwest Scientific Association. This is a different organization. They're going to convene for a few days in June. Plans have also been made for several longer trips. The June 15th trip will take the scientists to Kamiaka Butte, the Almalta Canyon. This is all stuff around Pullman. I don't know that area very well. But we've already talked a little bit about this Pullman meeting because the courtesy trip for women visitors also has been planned for the afternoon. The party will visit Lewiston, the Orchard District, and the Indian village of Lopway. Excursions scheduled for the days following the Pullman meeting will take the scientists to the Snake River Canyon, especially of interest to plant hunters, to the Scabland area between Spokane and the Columbia River with Professor J. Harlan Brentz as the leader, or to the Wallowa Mountain District in Oregon. So this is the Pullman meeting that I've been wanting to learn a little bit more about. It's the Pullman meeting that I talked about a few episodes ago, where I mentioned that Brett's was debating somebody, and after the somebody was critical of Brett's stuff, Brett said, everybody in your cars, let's go out to a Palouse Hill and I'll demonstrate that there was floodwater up to a certain elevation on the contours by using this colander. And I read the piece a couple episodes ago. The word said sieve, and I spoke the word colander instead, and I got probably 45 emails about the difference between a sieve and a colander. Colander, I can't confirm that the colander is what he was used instead of a sieve, but if you're trying to demonstrate that loess is going to fall through and stones are going to stay in, it's going to work a lot better with a colander than a sieve. So let's not get hung up on that. Thanks for your feedback, though. So this is the part of today's program that I asked Vic Baker about, and I'm going to read something with you that I haven't read yet, except I have read this letter. This is, is this Brett's? Yeah. Brett's to Thomas Large. Now we're approaching this Pullman meeting. Dear Tom, now it's Tom, it's not Large anymore. Dear Tom, I will debate Hodge all day long, from dawn until dewy eve on the day of the field trip. I will not give up one small fraction of my scheduled time on the program. If Hodge wants what he wants, let him get his own place by personal application. I am proud to say that I was invited to talk at your meeting, and I'm going to hang on to what I have been invited to accept. With best regards, cordially yours, J. Harlan Bretz. And so I wanted to learn a little bit about Hodge. I don't know who Hodge is. I think he's somehow with Oregon. But Hodge, apparently, as the story goes, heard that Bretz was going to be given this keynote address at this science meeting in Pullman, and Hodge said, I want to show up at the same meeting, and I want to debate Bretz in front of everybody. And so I emailed Vic last night, I guess, Vic Baker. You remember him from a couple of weeks ago. And Vic has been kind and say, any questions you have about the Bretz stuff or whatever, I can see if I can help you out. Maybe I emailed him more than 24 hours ago. Anyway, Vic said, sorry for the delay. This is an email that came in an hour before we started here this morning. I was able to get access to a scanner through my neighbor in Tucson, Arizona. Ours is kaput. There are 3 items attached. These seem the most relevant to your concern because they relate to the circumstances and details of the interactions between Bretz and Hodge related to the Pullman GSA meeting. I wonder if it was a GSA meeting or not, but it doesn't matter. I did not get to copy the entire 1934 Hodge Northwest Science paper. That's what I was really after. I couldn't find a digital version of that 1934 paper by Hodge. But that is really a subsequent document. I have a whole file of stuff on this, and have given short time frame. I just wanted to convey what seemed most relevant to your concern. The document I have for you, it's Bretz's own handwritten remembrance of the Pullman GSA meeting and the related interaction with Hodge. The original was sent to me by Bretz probably in the late 1970s. That's just a few years before he passed away. This is Vic Baker talking. I'll have to check my chaotic files to find the letter that accompanied this. And the other files I'm not going to share with you for a couple of reasons I guess I don't want to get into. Nick, perhaps your spies can find more about O'Rourke. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vic. So, 30 minutes before we started today, I grabbed the handwritten notes from Bretz, written in his old age, that he sent to Vic Baker in the late 1970s. And I quick converted it to PDF and I threw it into the server, and we're going to open it together right now and read it. But the context is, I wanted to see the Hodge paper, which I haven't found yet. And to me, I just love the story of a debate between one guy pontificating in a room full of interested people, and there's time for the other person in the debate to talk, and he says, let's go take a look instead of trying to talk about it. Let me show you guys. Actions are worth way more than words. I love that. Using a kitchen colander or a sieve. So, in real time, let's go to, maybe some of you have already figured it out. Let's go to nickzentner.com. Hopefully I pasted this properly. It's under Bretz. You're making a mistake. All this is available for free. Somebody's going to steal all your stuff. Here it is. Hopefully it works. It works. So how about this? For Vic Baker coming through for us. We're going to read together right now, for the first time, a little personal letter from our hero Harley Bretz, written to Vic Baker in let's make up a date, 1977. This is exciting. More lore. In 1930, plus or minus, and we know it's 1932. Okay, the Cordilleran section of the Geological Society of America met in Pullman. I, J. Harlan Bretz, was asked to give the all-purpose lecture, of the meeting and particularly talk on the Spokane flood. Gladly, I replied. So the announcements went out. In some semi-obscure educational institution of Oregon, there lurked a self-appointed authority on the earth sciences named E.T. Hodge. Oh, shit. Hang on. What's going on? Oh, I got to do that. Sorry. Reading the Pullman meeting program, he found that the non-authority, J.H. Bretz, was to give the big address of that meeting. He wrote Chairman Lookie, proposing that instead of one speaker, it should have two. He would debate with Bretz. My reply was a ringing no. The floor had been offered to me alone, of all GSA members who might be present. Then he proposed himself for a place on one of the sectional programs. But Lucky already had conquested programs for every section, couldn't squeeze another speaker in anywhere. Still undefeated, he now invented a new subsidiary society. He named, I do not recall, its name I do not recall well, but could have been like Society for the Extermination of All Outrageous Ideas. And the proposed debate could be held in some empty classroom in Pullman. To this I acceded. The evening for the big address by Bretz saw E.T. Lodge and a claque of Oregonian followers occupying front seats. I saw them too. Members of the GSA, ladies and gentlemen, I began with a perceptible pause, added, friends and friendly enemies. At that I saw a distinct ripple across the front row, but heard no sound from that area. So I shot my slides and ideas. Almost everybody already knew of that Spokane flood from my earlier papers. However, the morrow was to come, and my outrageous hypothesis would then receive its well-deserved comeuppance. It came with almost as large an audience as on the previous evening. ETH led. He announced that he considered the Spokane flood idea as great an attempt to solve an outstanding scientific problem as the planetesimal hypothesis, and it had its supporting three evidences, although incorrectly interpreted, as was the planetary hypothesis. The bursting of Lake Missoula Dam had been only a slow leakage. There was gross error in the assumption of a catastrophic flood, etc., etc., etc. I hope he continues and actually uses the word colander. That would be a thrill. I followed and simply proposed that we all have a field trip tomorrow. I had a fair string of cars and, of course, the Oregonian claque. I took them across the Palouse Hills at Pullman to the southern part of the Cheney-Palouse Scabland, the Willow Creek Bar, and the Palouse Snake Divide. En route, I demonstrated with a kitchen sieve, oh well, that above a certain level, loess was only loess, but below, the loess also contained many fresh basalt grains, granitic fines, etc., as a sufficient cover of only loess. Come on, man. What a surprise. What a thrill. We're not even done with the letter. This is the guy writing to Vic Baker in his own words with a personal letter, and we get a chance to read it in real time together for the first time at 2:32 Pacific time on Thursday, February 8th, 2024. Across the 80 square miles of Scabland on the summit of the Palouse Snake Divide, with its spectacular islands of prow-pointed Lucille hills, and across Lyons Ferry to the semi-isolated hill-capped with scabland gravel 500 feet above the snake, and to the old railroad gravel pit with its many percussion-flaked pebbles and cobbles, and its four-set bedding back down into the Snake Canyon. I did not then know that this hill summit gravel was a wonderful demonstration for my theory with its giant current ripples. But had I known and shown it, there were still determined doubters. Four-set bedding was only gravity-induced, subsequent by deposition. Eddy bars were remnants of something deposits, etc., etc. How agile is the human mind in defending preferred ideas and ignoring glaring facts? However, GSA sent me twice the sum we had agreed upon. I sent half of it back. That was fun. Thanks, Vic, for the letter. That was a special treat for us to be able to read that together. I got just a few left, I think. Famous last words. Hope you're enjoying this. It's been a long time since I've even seen if people are still here. 728. That's more than 10. Let's keep going. That's more than 10. Bretts and Bowman. Now we're to 1932, Christmas time. Bowman to Bretts. Dear Professor Bretts, we're almost done. Why? Bretts, there's an expedition to be undertaken next year to East Greenland. About a month or 6 weeks will be spent in the fjord region north of a sound. The ship will carry the party. There's a place in the expedition for a physiographer. A trained and experienced person is desired who could do effective work on glacial margins, and so on. If you would let me have your comments on the proposal, I should be glad to communicate with the leader, who would then write directly to you in order to give you further information, which you will no doubt wish to have before coming to a final decision. P.S. Are you by chance going to the meeting of the GSA in Boston this month? If so, you could meet the leader of this expedition and discuss the matter personally. Bretts to Large. 3 months later, Dear Large, 1933. I shall have to disappoint you, as well as myself, in our plans for next summer. Instead of coming out to Grand Coulee, I am going to Greenland. The opportunity is one that I cannot afford to turn down, even though I must put one of my opponents in charge as guide of the Grand Coulee trip. It is not, however, quite so illogical a situation as one might think. If I am right about my Grand Coulee theories, the field evidence should be convincing, even though displayed by one with different interpretations. I have asked Ira Allison to take charge of the 2-day visit, and I have put him in touch with Armstrong, Chamber of Commerce of Spokane. Allison, I think, is perfectly fair-minded, and I do not have the hesitation I would if Hodge were my only alternative. Allison has sent me a copy of his paper in full, and his theory has some attractive aspects. I am afraid, however, that he is going to have as many doubters on his trail as I have had on mine. With best regards, very truly yours, J. Harlan Bretts. And so, I cannot remember who you were that sent me this, maybe 6 months ago, but thank you. This is the guide that Bretts specifically wrote for this international whatever, for that 2-day portion of the trip in the summer of 1933, it turned out to be. Now remember, Bretts had, one of the reasons Bretts wanted to do this big Grand Coulee book in 1922 was to use it as a big portion of that, to use as the guide for this big international conference in the Grand Coulee. And probably in Bretts's mind, this would be, I don't know, is this fair to say? That if Bretts had not gone to Greenland in the summer of 1933, but had followed through on leading this 2 days in the Grand Coulee with his new book, with his air photos, with his new cross sections of the Great Blade and the old Lower Grand Coulee and all the, in his mind, perhaps that was going to be his moment to be accepted and applauded, because it wouldn't just be William Morris Davis in the Grand Coulee. Now he'd have this whole dream team of international experts applauding him and nodding in approval. It never happened. But I have the little guidebook, which is the abridged version of the Grand Coulee book. Docky? Colander's flying. I really regret not being able to remember who sent this to me. Thank you, though. So, International Geographical Conference. I think maybe Ken in Sandpoint just sent me a digital version of this an hour ago. Is that true, Ken? And if this is, I'll get this posted tonight. It's going to look familiar to us. 32. So this got printed also, and then for some reason the trip got delayed by a year. But as I think I'm realizing just in real time with you, and I may be off on this narrative, but Brett's is putting this together. These are the hymnals that all of these international people were going to be holding in their hands as they're standing in the Grand Coulee with Mr. Spokane Flood himself in a blue shirt, made that part up, finally kind of coming to terms with all of these arguments that he'd been experiencing in the previous 5 years. But little did Bretts know that his most staunch and harsh critic, one of his own, now teaching at Yale, possibly on that international trip, I don't know, it'd be fun to figure that out. But Flint is about, you know what? Is it possible? I'll show you the newspaper article. Is it possible to somehow find the roster of who came to this international meeting? And if Richard Foster Flint came to the Grand Coulee on August 15th of 1933 and was prepared to visit with Bretts in the flesh for the first time in many years, and Bretts wasn't there, Allison was the substitute teacher, and then immediately after that, in the summers to come, Flint is coming back to the Grand Coulee and other places, motivated to prove Bretts wrong. I wonder how much it was Flint in that Grand Coulee. Was Richard Foster Flint? Can we figure that out? Is that impossible to figure out? Was Flint on this trip? That would be a really interesting find if we could prove that. Which trip? Here's the Spokane paper in late July of 1933. This is wrong. I did this too quickly last night. This is 1933. Geology Party coming, August 15th, 1933. Eminent geologists, some of them from universities of Europe, all traveling in excursion C2 of the 16th International Geological Congress, will be entertained at dinner at the Davenport in downtown Spokane on the evening of August 15th. Armstrong, secretary of the Columbia section of the American Institute of Mining Engineers, is making arrangements. He has invited Spokane engineers to join, and also to join the party, which will arrive at Coulee City early August 14th to spend 2 days of inspecting the geological wonders of the Grand Coulee. Sorry, where does Frank McCann fit into this? I thought McCann was Mr. Grand Coulee, a local rancher and a local kind of amateur geology fan. I think Bretts was like staying at McCann's ranch for, were those 2 weeks in 1929? Did Frank McCann provide the home base, the home camp for Bretts? I guess that makes the most sense. I'm just reading this right now. I wonder if Frank McCann was involved in this 1933 thing, even though Bretts wasn't there. The International Geological Congress has been in session in Washington all week. Following this, it breaks up into sections and visits interesting districts of the United States. Excursion C2, I don't know what that means, comes west. You will be in charge of Dr. Field, who has made many excursions to points of geological interest in the Northwest. Assisting him will be Allison, substituting for Brett's, who's been delegated to spend the summer in Greenland. Well, that's interesting wording. Brett's is like, I got this great opportunity to go to Greenland from my connections with Bowman. You're not going to believe it, Thomas. And now this newspaper article says Brett's has been forced to not come on the trip and he's been delegated. Maybe I'm reading into things too much. The excursionists come by their own train, and after spending the first day about the southern portion of the Grand Coulee, will spend the night on their train. The next day will be given over to study in the northern part of the coulee, north of the site of the Columbia on the Grand Coulee Dam. At night, they will board their train again at Elmira and will come into Spokane in time for dinner. They continue east the next morning. Shortly after, Brett's writes up his Greenland summer. We finish with this. Flint to Thomas Large. Flint is no longer writing to Brett's. And Flint is writing this letter not from Connecticut, but what does this say? USK? Is that a place? Usk, Washington? Mr. Large, my interpretation of the deposits at the bottom of Long Hill is that they are backwater deposits of the proglacial Spokane River, and that they have nothing to do with either I can't read that, or the Columbia. I have found no evidence to date that the Columbia between the Canadian boundary and the mouth of the Spokane ever occupied a course different from its present one. You may be assured that I shall not infringe in any way upon your discoveries in the Spokane district, and I will, of course, send you a copy of whatever I may publish on the region. Regarding the paragraph for Northwest Science, under the terms of my contract with the GSA, I am not permitted to mention the fact that I am working under a grant. I am taking the liberty of writing a substitute item, which I trust will prove satisfactory, and which I enclose herewith. I shall be glad to hear any developments in the study of the geology of the Spokane district, and if I am able to return next June, I shall look forward to seeing you again. It has been a pleasure to meet you this year. With best wishes, sincerely yours, Richard Foster Flint. P.S. We are spending our last 3 weeks in the mountains south of the rivers and return east the first week in September using the Okanagan Valley. Next fall, next year, 1936. Now we're typing. Again, are we talking to Brett's? Maybe we're not. Maybe there's been a falling out. I mean, why would they keep writing letters? Why would Flint and Brett's keep being pen pals if Flint is now publishing papers that are specifically contradicting Brett's work? Maybe we'll never know what happened in the early 30s. Seems like that's when things went south. I don't know. Dear Mr. Large, this is Richard Foster Flint writing again. I return herewith the separate which you kindly lent me last spring. It was very helpful, and I am much obliged to you. I spent the entire summer season in the Pasco, Rock Lake, and Ritzville region, and was in Spokane only one day, late in August. I tried to reach you by phone without success, and I am very sorry to have had to leave without seeing you. I met Rocky, I don't know who that is still, on the road down near Central Ferry, near Palouse Falls, and told him about the results of my study, which include an explanation of the Cheney-Palouse-Scabland track involving very much less water and much more time than Brett's hypothesis. I saw Brett's in Chicago last week. What? September of 1936. I saw Brett's in Chicago in late September 1936, and I am glad to say that he is favorably inclined toward it as better fitting the facts than the flood hypothesis. Thomas Large, this is Dick Flint. I just visited with Brett's in Chicago in 1936, and I'm happy to report that he's inclined toward my ideas as better fitting the facts than his flood hypothesis. That's pretty weird. You're like, well, maybe that's not weird. Maybe Brett's agreed that his flood hypothesis was wrong. And then Brett's came back in 1952 to back up all of Flint's. Of course not. That's not what happened. What a weird statement. He's playing games with Thomas Large. This from Sky Cooley. Color-coded for our themes this winter. Red is stage 2. Blue is older than stage 2. You happy with that, Sky? But here's Alden himself, Mr. Cautious Alden, in Montana, east of Glacier National Park. Here's David Letterman's house in Choctaw, or however you pronounce it, Montana. A toast to you. Yet again, here's to you, the rare live viewer who was strapped in here for 3 hours plus. Thank you. Here's to Susan, who wonders, what's with this guy Flint? Here's to Roger, who helps me pronounce the name of that town in Montana as Shoto. Thank you, Roger. Here's to you and your health. Whether you're watching this live or in replay, thank you for tuning into this episode. Here's to Sean Wilsey, who was a guest in the last episode, and I saw that he got up very early this morning and did a live stream with a new eruption from Iceland. And so we caught a break to catch Sean on Sunday morning when Iceland was quiet, but Iceland is back doing its thing. Here's to Sean. Here's to Jon Shellenberger from Toppenish, Washington. Really enjoyed our visit with John. I sincerely hope that you did as well. Is there anybody left? Yeah, sure there is. Here's to Sharon and Ken and Glenn and Jody and the countless other people. Margaret in Spokane, Cheryl, the research librarian in Pullman. The list goes on and on. Vic Baker sending stuff in. Come on, man. This is fun. Here's to all of the contributors to this series. You're making a mistake. Somebody's going to steal all your work. That's not what's going on in my mentals. I got to get my mentals right. Thank you, everybody. I love you, and I'm not afraid to put hearts on the screen, even though students are walking by and wondering what's up with the old man in the black shirt making hearts to himself in a mirror. No, of course not. I can do anything I want. Nobody will notice what's going on in here. Programming note. We are down to 3 episodes left, which is really 6 episodes, right? Because we're doubling up on each of these things. If you haven't figured that out. Scott Burns from Portland State University will be our guest, talking about very old Ice Age flood deposits that he has found with his students in the Columbia River Gorge. That's this coming Sunday at 9 in the morning. A week from today, Richard Waite, one of the biggest names in the business, will be with us from his office at the United States Geological Survey, Cascade Volcano Observatory. And Richard and I did a quick AV test yesterday, and we're going to test a couple more times just to make sure we're comfortable with the technology. But not sure what we're going to do with Richard, but I'm sure it will be fun. And then, yes, Jerome Lessman, Sky Cooley, and Joel Gombiner will be back all together, 4 heads on one screen, for Session Z. Here's to you, I love you, and goodbye from Ellensburg, Washington, USA. You are special. You are my friend. You are my friend, you are special, special to me. Mama, 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 mama. See you Sunday. You are my friend, you are special. There's a lady in an orange dress, walking with a man, I think. Nope, 2 women. Stage 4. Thank you, Roger. Ain't no flies on the meadow. Ain't no flies on the meadow. Ain't no flies on the meadow. Anytime you go